Everybody, it is 4 o'clock, so we'll begin. We see that everybody is here. Student Trustee Farmer, Trustee Nielsen, Trustee Croninger, Trustee Miller, Trustee Bloom, welcome back. We missed you, Marty. Trustee Haslan and Trustee Aboud. Please stand for, no, not yet. Yes, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. When it goes dim, I'm like, what happened here? Ready, begin. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no recognitions, but we do have two items that we want to take out of order, and that's item 7.1 and items 8.1, because we have Lindsay Moss on teleconference.
We do have Lindsay Moss on teleconference, beaming in from Washington, D.C. I understand the storm is not near her at this point, but she has prepared the projections, the fiscal projections for us, and the guys have got her set up to be able to do that. So, Lindsay, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, board members. And here I am coming from out of the sky. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
No video.
So I'm assuming that the presentation for the 5-year fiscal projection is up on the screen.
Yes.
We'll get started. There's not a lot of slides, but there is a lot of content to the 5-year fiscal projections. As you know, a lot of work goes into this information. So getting into this here, the first slide is on why do we do fiscal projections? Why do we have them here at Santa Barbara City College? So our 5-year fiscal projections are something that we started doing in October of 2016. And at that time, we had experienced a large decline in FTES, which resulted in our revenues becoming very unstable and continuing to decline as well. And it was very critical that we started to create these 5-year fiscal projections so we would know how we could strategize going forward and make sure that we would be financially able to make it through future years with that FTS decline. So we have been doing them since October 2016, but we haven't done one in quite a while with the changes to the new funding formula coming down the pike. So this is the first time we've seen projections in the last year now. Let's see, I have a bunch of notes. There's everything here on the slide you can see, but I have other notes as well as to why we do 5-year fiscal projections. Because we do have a board policy that requires us to stay at a certain reserve level. We need to make sure we stay above that level going out into future years, and the projections help us do that as well. And another part about projections that we don't talk about a whole lot is we've chosen to do 5-year projections instead of 3-year projections. A lot of other community colleges and businesses only project out 3 years. Going 5 years is above and beyond what's required for accreditation, but it does give us a look into farther out than just 3 years. 3 years is sort of the time period that is easier to project. When you get out into the 4 and 5 year time period, that's a long ways out. Those 4 and 5 year out ranges that we're hitting the nail on the head in terms of where we're going to land, but at least it's a good look instead of not knowing where we're headed in those future years. One more piece about our projections that we always have to keep in mind is the fiscal projections they're always changing. They're always based on different assumptions and different strategies that we're going to be working on. So that makes it sometimes very difficult to compare one batch of projections to a previous batch of projections that we did maybe a year or two earlier. We may be changing the FTS assumptions. We may be changing now the new revenue stream coming from the new funding formula. We also would be changing our strategies for savings. So they can fluctuate quite a bit, and it's hard to explain that, well, 2 years ago our projection looked like X and now it looks like Y. But in this presentation, I'm going to try my best to recap last year's projections briefly so that we can try to understand where we were at last year and what our 5-year projections look like this year. Okay. This next slide is on our historical FTS. It's just a good visual to get an idea of why we started doing projections. This slide shows our total full-time equivalent students or total FTES and how much it has declined. I will say that in last year's presentation, if anyone is looking at last year's, this slide has been updated to include all FTES, not only resident FTES. Previously, it was resident only, and I included all FTS this year. It just seemed to be more relevant as time goes on to include all the FTS. So you can see the decline that's going on from 09-10 down to 17-18. That's an FTS decline of 23%. That's been very critical for us in the past to understand because our revenues are coming from our FTS. Now that's not, with our change in our new funding formula, that's not our only funding stream, which is good news for us, but this is still a major portion of our funding. Okay, so last year, it was September 2017, exactly 1 year ago, was the last time we looked at our five-year fiscal projection, right, at the same time of year when we were adopting our budget. And in that round of projections, we had done a lot of work on strategies and different ways we could bring our budget into balance because we had a structural deficit, a large one, and we weren't seeing any changes in the revenue or any large increases in our FTS. So we had put into place through our projections a lot of strategies to try and bring our budget into balance. And they're up on the screen here. Everyone remembers RAP, and we've talked about RAP a lot over the last year. Our educational program efficiencies. We also had planned reductions in the hourly budgets. And one thing we don't talk a lot about because it was sort of seamless was we changed how our instructional supplies were funded. They used to be funded straight out of the unrestricted general fund. And not too long ago, only I don't remember if it was a year or 2 years ago now, these years are blending together. I think it might've been 2 years ago, we changed the structure and the instructional supplies are now funded directly out of the restricted lottery fund. And that's a typical practice at most schools. So that helped reduce our unrestricted general fund expenditures each year. And it also created a streamlined process of how those funds are used. And it's working pretty well. So that will continue into the future. It's quite a seamless change. No one really even noticed. It was just a change of an account number. And that restricted lottery fund is funded every year about to the amount of money we were spending on instructional supplies anyway. So that worked pretty well. So we also had planned in prior years with our projections that we would be updating our projections often throughout the year, that it wouldn't be just this one time a year that we would be doing this work. But unfortunately, as I just pointed out, we haven't done it since a whole year ago. And most of us are familiar why we had this time period from January to July, wondering what was going on with the new funding formula. So it sort of made it a moot point to be working on projections when we didn't know where our revenues would be heading. So that's why we didn't do any updated projections during that time period. But that doesn't mean we didn't work on our budget and our projections. We actually did quite a bit last year, and last year was one of the first years that we modified our adopted budget during the year, the 17-18 budget, and made major adjustments to it so we could see where we were landing with our staffing levels. The many vacancies that we had throughout the year, we did adjust in the budget so that we could get a better projection for the end of last year. And that helped us understand where we were headed and if we were headed in the right path with RAP and other cost savings. Okay, and the next slide we go on to is this September 2017. So remember, this is last year. These are not the updated projections for today. These are last year's projections, just as a recap, so everyone can see, and probably many people remember these numbers from last year. So we have the 2018-19, that net adjusted to ending balance, the negative 3.3 million number was the big number that we were working towards making sure we would do the best we could for reducing that deficit, because that was the largest deficit that we were going to have over the future projections last time around. The reason why 18-19 looked worse than the previous year is because the FTS was decreasing in those years in 16, 17. And with the 1 year lag in funding, we were going to see that decrease in our revenues hit us in 18, 19. And then in 19, 20, and so on, it would start to pick up. We also had a slight increase built into the assumptions for our FTS in those future years as well, which is why you see that net adjustment to ending balance line going from the negative 3.3 million on up to basically flat the next year, and then 3.2, and then all the way up to 5.3 out in that final year. In that projection, we did have some very aggressive strategies for reducing our staffing with RAP. We had specific amounts we had planned to reduce each year. It was $1.3 million each year over 3 years, and a new process for hiring that resulted in vacant positions being hired over a much slower time period. And we had adjustments in our educational programs, some efficiency work we were trying to do to reduce the costs in the ed programs area as well. And we worked very hard on that, and that's why we saw our 17, 18 actual budget. We resulted in the end of the year doing much better than we had planned. In fact, we had a surplus with our final numbers for 17, 18. And that's attributable to all the work that we put into the projections, and the strategies that we had built as a part of those projections did come to fruition. Okay, now we're going to go into talking about these current projections, the new projections. The current projections are based on our 18-19 budget. So we do a lot of work with our budget when we do a full budget process down to the very line item detail of every single account, every person, every little bit of detail you could go into in a budget. We do that during our annual budget process. Therefore, it only makes sense to use our 18-19 budget as the starting point for our projections going out for the next 4 years. And the student-centered funding formula, the new funding formula, was really the basis of our budget for 18-19 that impacted our budget and our future projections dramatically because of the new revenues that we're receiving in that budget. The important piece of the assumptions that I want everyone to be sure they understand for the new student-centered funding formula is that the phasing of how this new student-centered funding formula revenues come into us. Hopefully everyone remembers the presentation from a couple weeks ago on that new funding formula. The 3 components of the new funding formula: we receive funding primarily based on our FTS, then on the low income piece, the count of low income students, and then on the count of the student outcomes, the student success. The second one I mentioned, the count of low income, it's 20% of our funding formula, and it remains 20% of our funding formula for the next 3 years. That piece is stagnant. But the FTS and the count of the student outcomes, those ones do fluctuate as the new funding formula is implemented entirely. So for 18-19, the FTS piece is 70% of our revenue, whereas the count of student outcomes, the student success piece, is only 10%. And that increases 5% a year for the next 2 years. And those assumptions are built into these projections that you're going to see for the next 5 years. So by decreasing our FTS, the portion of revenue we receive for FTS over the next 5 years, and putting that instead down to the student success piece where we do really well, it means that we would expect to receive more revenues in those next 2 future years because more is being put in that student success section. Okay. I was planning on asking if anyone has questions at the end, but this is so tricky. Do you mind if I stop for a second? Does everyone get that?
Yeah, they're good, Lindsay.
We're not.
Okay, great. All right. So the other piece of the student-centered funding formula assumptions that we've built into these projections is that the metrics that were used combination of what was received by the Chancellor's Office and how we modified the metrics based on our student counts, that is the same. So we didn't project any changes, say, to the number of certificates we're going to be having our students complete. We didn't change the number of low-income student counts that we're expecting to have in future years. That's just too far out. We don't know how our metrics will be changing in future. This early in the game, this new funding formula is so new that we decided the best approach was just to leave all those metrics exactly the same. So the only thing changing in our revenue assumptions for these projections related to the new funding formula is that phasing of the three pieces of the funding formula. Okay. So next is just a general discussion about the revenue assumptions that were built into these projections. And a reminder first of how we've always been building these projections in hopes of making it easiest for all of us to understand them as we keep the type and number of assumptions built in to as few as possible. We put in any that are critical that we know would change our financial situation, but we are not building into our projections, for example, changes to every single account line item you could possibly think of. We try to keep it simple so we can understand why things are changing. So the revenue assumptions, the information you see on the slide here, this is about it. There are not a lot of changes built into the assumptions on the revenues. The first one listed there is related to the base FTS apportionment piece. That's something we did build into the projections last year. We had built in half a $500,000 per year increase just for our base apportionment. That's sort of typical to be receiving from the state for us. So we did include it again. The difference between how we included it this time and last time is we included it after the new funding formula is completely implemented. So it's only included in the final 2 years of our projections, not in the current year or the next 2 years as the new funding formula is implemented completely. We have a whole slew of FTS assumptions that are built in, and the next slide goes through that, so I won't talk about that too much right here, but the FTS assumptions are critical to the projections. We do not include in the projections, and we never have, any future COLAs. We don't know what they would be. It's simplest just to not include that, and they range from year to year, so we've never included those before. I wanted to highlight in previous projections, we had included information about the revenue that we received from the center status funding for Wake and SHOT, and we do not have anything included in the future projections for additional revenue coming from the center status for Wake and SHOT, but that's because we have already reached the goal we were planning on reaching much farther out. So a huge kudos to Dr. Melissa Moreno and her work with the School of Extended Learning, because she's grown the FTS at those two centers to equal an additional $300,000 at each center, which helps our revenue stream. So that's already in the 18-19 budget, and then it remains the same throughout future years. And then the last revenue change that is different from previous, also similar to the last comment I just made about School of Extended Learning, is we had planned in previous years to transfer all of the money from the School of Extended Learning Reserve Fund, and we'd planned on doing that over 3 years, but we've done it over 2 years because it's ramped up more quickly than we planned. So we're trying to offset the expenses that are in that coming through that program. So there won't be any additional transfers coming into the unrestricted general fund from the Extended Learning Reserve because we'll have transferred them all over in 18-19. So next is the FTS assumptions, the specific details here. This is the same slide we used last year. There's a lot of details about the percentage changes and then the actual FTS numbers. So depending on whether you look at the orange box or the blue box, it gives you a very different concept of what the assumptions we're using are for FTS. The orange box is the percentage change from 1 year to the other with the FTS. And you can see that, right now with our credit FTS, we're still seeing some slight decline in FTS. So we don't have any growth in 18-19. Last year's projections, we actually had more FTS growth out in 19-20, and we brought that back down to 1% to try to be conservative. It's very hard to tell where we'll be at with the FTS numbers, which is why we'll continue to do projections as we learn more information. But right now we're budgeting or forecasting this 1% increase in credit only. Then you see nothing on the non-credit enhanced. And then you see the large percentage increase, that 154.7%, and then 20% for the non-credit, non-enhanced. That's that transition of the non-credit fee-based courses, fee-based courses becoming non-credit courses. And the percentages look incredibly high, but if you go down to the blue box, you can see the actual FTS numbers, which are quite small compared to our credit resident numbers. And you can kind of get an understanding of what's actually happening there with the FTS and how it still is a small part of our students overall, but growing dramatically. Then on the non-resident, we have the credit out of state and the credit international non-resident sections right now. Historically, we haven't assumed any type of major changes in those up or down with the FTS. So we've done the same here, but I think that's something we'll be working on, is trying to determine if those are going to continue to decline or stay flat or unsure. See on the blue box if there's anything else worth pointing out. So that 17-18 FTS is the actual FTS, and then projections going out further. I think that's it for the FTS piece. Moving on here to the expense side, talking about the expenditure assumptions that we've used in the projections. Again, quite simple. We don't include so many that we don't understand why the numbers are changing. The implementation of the School of Extended Learning, we've actually completed that. All the costs that are going to increase due to that implementation are in the 18-19 budget. Last year, they were phased out into future years, which is why we've noted here that it's not phased into future years. It's already complete in 18-19, so we don't have any increase in costs related to School of Extended Learning in future years in these projections. Now, the SERP and reorgs that many of us have been talking about for a long time now, because it happened a couple years ago, it always comes up, where are we at with the SERP, and how much money did we save with the SERP, and did we save what we expected, and how is the SERP portrayed in the projections now? And it's really kind of hard for people to wrap their head around that the SERP happened a couple years ago now. And all of the reorganizational changes that were made in departments where maybe positions weren't replaced, or they were, but with someone new at a different salary, all of that is alive and happening now. Those people are in their positions, the budgets are there, and we aren't projecting any future changes because the SERP has already happened. We based our projections off of the 18-19 budget. And the 18-19 budget, as I mentioned, is detailed and has all of the current salaries required based on our current staffing levels. So there's nothing in our projections that reference SERP or reorganizational savings, and hopefully, eventually we can stop having that in these projection slides anyways, because we already did that. PERS and STIRS continue to be very difficult to deal with those financial increases on the expense side. So what these percentages are that are on the slide here is telling us percentage increase from one year to the next of what the rates are. I have over here on my notes that STIRS, what that means is that STIRS is going all the way up to a district required contribution of 19.1% in 2021. Now, they haven't provided to us anything beyond 2021. It's possible it will continue to increase, but all we know is the increase all the way out to 2021. So the current rates we have increase 11.36% and then another 5.35 to get us all the way up to a district contribution of 19.1% on STIRS. On PERS has supplied information to all the districts that they have their plan of how much they're going to be increasing all the way out to 22-23. And they're increasing the district rate to 27.4%. So we have built into our assumptions the required increase to get to that 27.4% of a district contribution to PERS. Now those numbers are nothing small. They're quite significant figures that increase our budgets over $1 million. And more into future years. Okay, the other new piece that's in our expenditure assumptions, again, stemming from our 18-19 budget, as everyone recalls, the 18-19 budget has a $6.5 million appropriation for contingencies. Now, because that's all we know about that right now, that we just have that set amount set aside, we aren't able to project anything more specific than that, except that we know that amount will increase. Whatever it is allocated to will surely have some type of required increase. So we did apply a 3% growth to that number in our projections. Then the typical things that we would include in our projections, we have the step and longevity increases that result when employees move into a new longevity increment or into a new step on their salary table, and that costs about $400,000 a year to the district. So we have that in the projections. And then some small increases to health and welfare and contracts and utilities, just to have a reasonable estimate of how much those costs would increase. Okay, transfer assumptions. It's an important part of our budget. It hasn't been talked about so much now because we brought the numbers down significantly, but in previous years, the transfers that came out of the unrestricted general fund and went into other funds for the district, such as the construction fund and the equipment fund, were very large. They were more to the tune of $3, $4, or $5 million. So we've scaled all those transfers down to the bare minimum to help with our deficit and reduce our expenditures. And this is what the transfers look like now. Nothing too terribly new here from last year's projections. These are very similar projections of how we would do the transfers. Really, the only difference we're seeing here is that the equipment fund, the IT refresh and program review, 18-19, we are having to transfer money there because we've brought that down to pretty much down to the board minimum level. So to fund the IT refresh, we do need to put $375,000 there, part of the budget we've already discussed. But then it goes up to the $750,000, which just covers IT refresh. It doesn't cover anything for program review. And that's typically something that we have helped fund from the unrestricted general fund. And also the construction fund, that $540,000 is really the bare minimum we spend a year on emergency repairs across the campus. And before we would transfer more like a couple $1 million to the construction fund for various construction projects. So those are a couple areas where we need to be aware that continuing to have them projected at these lower amounts into future years has some risk to them because we should be funding those other things at higher numbers than, like we did in the past. And the only new thing on that transfers in section near the bottom is this just breaks out that extended learning reserve fund, and you can see how it will be done in 18-19 and not carry out into future years like it did in the last version of the projections. All right, whipping along and all this fun information. Next 3 slides, I detailed out the cost-saving strategies that we've been working on for the last 3 years. I'm sorry, not 3 years, the 3 items, the last year or two. So the first one is WRAP. So the Workforce Reduction for Attrition Plan. As I mentioned early on, this is a approach that we came up with to try and help with our deficit. And the idea was to create a new process on campus for hiring. Previously, we would, if someone left a position for whatever reason, we would replace them. And there usually wasn't too much of a lag between the time that they left and then we would replace them. We'd open the position and replace them. So we started a new process where there was a whole review process and ranking process for positions that became open. I'm specifically referring to classified staff and managers. The full-time faculty have a different process that's been going on for many years. So we've been using this new process, and the goal was to save $1.3 million last year by strategically deciding which positions to replace and which ones to not replace at that time. And last year we did save a significant amount of money because we only hired a handful of positions last year. And when the change with the new funding formula came up a good 9 months ago now, we became very concerned about which direction that was going to take us, and we didn't hire any positions in the spring based on the WRAP ranking that occurred then. The ranking occurs twice a year, or has occurred twice a year so far. So we were very successful in reducing the number of positions with the WRAP. last year. But what has occurred today now is we have 29 positions on that RAP list ranked and waiting to be filled. So it's quite a backlog and a long list of positions that many departments are desperately hoping will be filled as they've, endured a year or two of having a reduction in their staff and not much help. So that's something we're planning to continue to work on. And that's why in these projections, we do not have further reductions in our staffing with this concept of the RAP. 29 positions is a large number of positions, and it's going to take a lot more ranking and understanding where our budget's at to see how many we can fill and how many we won't fill. So we didn't project anything in these 5-year projections of specific no hiring at all. What we did include is the one-time savings that we saw a lot of one-time savings last year, just in basically the stalling of hiring positions. The ranking process takes time. We may not want to, fill X number of positions, and that becomes budgetary savings at the end of the year. So we are projecting $250,000 a year of one-time savings in the projections. And then on the educational efficiency savings side, this was an area last year where we had projected about $900,000 in savings in educational efficiency, working to improve our class sizes and our metrics with our sections. And Dr. Paul Gerald did do a lot of work on that in the last year and made some headway with it. But unfortunately, with his departure, it's difficult to continue on with the projections and the process that he had started. So we've reduced that down to about $200,000 per year, knowing we still need to work on this. Our efficiency is very important, and we can make a lot of progress, but probably not as much as we had planned last year. So we do have some savings built in here, but not quite to the tune that we had before. So we're expecting over the next 3 years about $600,000 in savings related to this item, and nothing all the way out in 22, 23. At that point, we would assume we'd gotten to the levels we were hoping for. Then on hourly staff, kind of the last one of the 3 major initiatives we worked on. Last year, we did include that we would have continued reductions in our hourly budgets and our hourly staffing levels. And what happened was when we got down to the nitty-gritty of trying to roll out budget reductions with the hourly, the dollar amounts overall was not going to be a very large savings. It was going to be an immense amount of implementation. So we decided to just hold these budgets firm. And by doing that, we do actually see a reduction in costs because California has raised the minimum wage dramatically each year for the last few years, and it will continue for the next few years. It will increase $1 a year. So by leaving the budgets the way they are, budget managers are having to reduce the hours of their hourly staff and students quite a bit. And it actually equals out to be almost what we were trying to reach of the 10%. It's about 9% savings we'll be seeing in future years just by holding those budgets flat as the minimum wage increases. Okay, we finally got there. The actual 5-year fiscal projections. Here we are, the numbers. So I've kind of covered all of the bullet points here. Where it's just explaining that it's based on the 18-19 adopted budget. We have the new revenues that came from the student-centered funding formula, which have really helped reduce our budget deficit dramatically. We have some updated FTS projections, which are actually not as positive as last year's projections. Then we have the placeholder for the $6.5 million. And then we have the changes to the RAP and educational efficiency and hourly projections that we had in the previous year. So the important bottom line, although it's not the bottom line on the sheet, to me, the bottom line is that net adjustment to the ending balance. You see our 18-19 budget of the deficit of $1.5 million. We do continue to have a deficit in 19-20 based on the assumptions in the projections. but then we are able to get to a balanced budget pretty much in 2021. I would call $100,000 close enough to balanced. And then staying similar out into 2022 and 2023. The tough part with what's going on right now with the new funding formula makes it really hard to know where we're going to be with our revenues, not knowing what our final revenue figures will be for this year until February of next year makes me, very cautious, very concerned about where we're going to be landing. These projections really help us see that we do still have a structural deficit, even though we have the new revenues coming. We do still need to work on strategic initiatives to bring our costs down while also honoring our employees and trying to give staff and managers the help that they need in their departments. So this is a good information to understand where we're headed and what strategies we should be using for this year. But I'm looking forward to having more numbers in February from the Chancellor's office and redoing these again and having even a better idea of what the future is looking like. The next slide is our fund balances for the future years. So obviously you could see from the previous slide, I didn't highlight it, but the $1 million deficits each year is a minor impact on our ending fund balances and then coming to flat. So we're still well above our board minimum reserve balance of $21.9 million. I'd like to point out that this slide shows the gold bar, the yellow bar of 21.9 million is of the board reserve minimum. That's based on the 18-19 revenue and expense levels. So that line does move each year. Technically, in 22, 23, it would be a little bit higher, more like 23 million if you base it on the revenues in that year. But I just set it at the 18-19 level. So you can see we're still in a good shape above that board minimum. And then the equipment fund, like I said, we've really got that down to the board minimum, that $1.5 million. That's why we have to transfer money there for the IT refresh, or if we wanted to use resources for program review requests. And then the green bar is the construction fund. As you know, we have the money set aside there previously for the campus center building, and that just remains in there. So there's no changes to the plans of those funds at this time. And the very last slide, I actually just kind of hit on this. We're looking forward to doing more projections in the future. The two pending pieces that will impact these projections dramatically would be our completion of negotiations with the bargaining units. Will give us clear information as to where the salaries would be in the future. And then also our revenues from the state. When we receive that in February, that'll be another point where we can update these projections and have some better information for the future. And I think I did it.
Yes, you did, Lindsay. My only question is, how'd you manage to shine a light beam all the way from the East Coast? Because for those of us not looking directly at the audience, you'd think you'd have a little Star Wars thing going on. So thank you, for those of you that noticed. Yes, you were shining the light. Thank you. Any questions for Lindsay? Lindsay, they were taking notes. I saw pens. We didn't interrupt your presentation, but I can start with Student Trustee Farmer if you have any questions for Lindsay Moss. Anybody questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about the hourly projection. So we're keeping that exactly the same today as would be in 3 years. And since the minimum wage is increasing by a small amount, I think, still, that's going to reduce the amount of hourlies. But I've heard anecdotally that that's a strain for people to have that reduction, and people having less work hours they're able to do, and that extra couple hours of work could be really important to someone in like department work or just taking home that pay. So I know we're waiting until February to get our final budgets, but I'd say that maybe changing that from not a hold to an increase just to help maintain the hours. I just think that that's important. Like, it is an effective reduction in staff, and $1 extra to somebody is more important to them than to us, I think.
Yeah, Peter.
The non-resident tuition or revenue stream seemed well, it was flat, and so we're assuming that there's going to be no change, but there will be change in the terms of international students coming to the campus and perhaps out-of-state students. So at what point do you factor in those variables in terms of understanding our general revenue stream?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Trustee Haslam. It's something that we do need to look at. With this fall coming to an end, the FTS numbers coming in right now, it's felt a little too early to try and project what future years would look like. But for the next round of the projections, I'd like to work with our Dean of International Students and see if there's any good ideas of what we should be using for assumptions for the non-resident students. So I would expect some changes to that next time.
Okay. And also, the fundamental change is the increase in revenue based on student success, and we're saying that's going to be about 5% a year. Is that going to be matched with a 5% decrease from FTES? How is that 5% going to materialize?
Yeah, that's right. It's a little more complicated than that because of the way we receive one lump of money, but it's divided between those three components. But you're right. So the FTES piece gets smaller while the student outcome piece gets larger. And because we perform better on student outcomes than FTES, like for example, let's say we were only funded on student outcomes, we would end up getting significantly more revenue than only being funded on FTES per the new funding formula. So it's not quite 5% for 5%. It's that we do better in the student outcomes metrics, which results in more revenue to us getting funded that way. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I was assuming. It's just good to hear it. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say, in line with that, this is the last time you're going to see just FTES projections. So going forward, since we're going to be funded on the student success, student completion, livable wage, all these other metrics, we're going to have to figure out how to, project that. And so that'll be a new experience for us, because that'll be it's not going to be just FTES anymore. It's going to be, combinations of those metrics.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm just focusing on those things that seem to stay the same, and that's for the convenience of the graph rather than reality. And for example, when we talk about the construction fund staying stable at, $540 million, if anything, construction tends to increase in cost. So I would say that's something else to watch as we go forward, because that number will increase unless we just stop construction or reconstruction.
Nope, you're right.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay.
Trustee Croninger.
Lindsay, thank you for a tremendously clear presentation all the way from Washington, as Veronica noted. Can you remind me what our efficiency savings were for last year?
Oh, I didn't bring my notes on that. I meant to bring my budget notes from last time.
That's okay. I
Yeah,
know
I hate to
flying
rattle it off
Washington, you
without
don't wanna
remembering.
bring
It was in
everything.
the hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
They charge her extra if she packs a bigger luggage. So she probably just carry on. Thank you.
I know, paper is heavy.
Any additional questions for Lindsay? Okay, seeing as though there's no more discussion or questions, that concludes item 7.1, information 5-year projections. For item 8.1, approval of the 2018-19 adopted budget, this is our final public hearing. Do we need to go through all of it, or do you want to, what does the board want? Was she planning
It's your
on going
pleasure.
over stuff?
She wasn't planning on going
So
through the
she's
budget
just,
again.
she's on the mic still, or online somewhere, if we have any
Yeah.
questions. If not, well, before we discuss it, is there a motion to approve?
To have a question. What are the major changes from last time, if there are any?
Yeah, I did want to jump in and explain that. So the way the process works for our budget development is the board is required to see the budget twice. So you saw it last time as the first public hearing, and there's no changes from last time to this time. So it's the same exact presentation, the same exact information, just here again for you today in case you have any additional questions.
Thank you.
Yes, trustee.
I would move approval.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved by trustee Haslam and seconded by trustee Croninger to approve the 2018-19 adopted budget. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. So that concludes our out of order, Dr. Beebe?
Yep.
Okay, now we're going back up to approval, item 4.1, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of August 9th and special meeting of August 10th, 2018. Is there a motion to approve? This public comment is for an agenda item, and so we're going to wait till that comes up. Yes, no problem. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve.
A second? Okay, it's been motioned by trustee Abud and second by trustee Miller to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of August 9th and special meeting of August 10th, 2018. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. That brings us to item 5.1. Is there a call for removing any items from the consent agenda? No? Okay, is there a motion to approve items 6.1 through 6.4?
I move.
Is there a second? Okay, it's been moved by trustee Nielsen and seconded by trustee Haslam to approve the consent agenda, items 6.1 through 6.4. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. That brings us down to our guest who is here. We now move on to item 9.1, and this is part of the board's annual and ongoing education, and we are very thankful to have Mr. Craig Price, which is the college's general counsel, and he'll be providing the board with a review of pertinent elements of the Brown Act governing meetings and interactions of the Board of Trustees. Additionally, Mr. Price will provide a review of the board's ethics policy.
Perfect timing. Professor Price.
Purely coincidental, I assure you. Well, good afternoon, board members,
Good afternoon.
Dr. Beebe.
Good afternoon.
So I'm on to talk about both ethics and the Brown Act. So I'll spend a little bit of time on both, but I thought because the whole question of ethics is so topical that I would start out with that. It's topical everywhere, nationally, statewide, and certainly here at Santa Barbara City College. So you have a distinguished philosophy department and many academics, and I don't pretend to be a philosopher or an academic. I'm just an old lawyer. But I do think about these issues, and what I'd like to start out with is just a mention of what ethics are. What do they consist of? And then how is that contrasted with other types of standards? Very briefly, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines ethics as the principles of conduct governing a group. So I think that's interesting. The focus is being part of a group. These are the rules that the group has set and expects members of that group to follow. Obviously, that's very different than morals, which obviously relate to a more personal standard, an internal standard. And then the third element, of course, is laws. And laws are generally, and Dr. Haslam can step in, I'm sure he's going to leap in and correct me based on all of his years of knowledge.
That falls into the category of fat chance.
But laws generally, it seems to me, are measures that are passed when federal government, state government, local government regard something as being so harmful to people that they warrant some kind of a sanction or some kind of a punishment. And in that regard, I see that laws are very distinct from ethics, because by and large, violations of ethics are not something that are sanctionable to any considerable degree. That is to say, for example, when it comes to board ethics, and we'll talk briefly, but you know what the board ethics are. You've read the board policies and so on. We'll cover that briefly. But when it comes to those, what are the sanctions? Well, at one extreme, of course, you can be voted out of office. You can be censured, which doesn't carry anything with it other than a stamp of disapproval. You can be held up to public ridicule, but those are extremely rare, and they're not very impactful ordinarily. People are expected to uphold ethics and board ethics because it's the right thing to do. And as the leaders of this institution, that's what you care about, is the institution and doing the right thing. And that's why the ethics are important. Now, sometimes, obviously, there are very difficult situations that are encountered where actions that are hurtful, blameworthy, irresponsible, non-collegial, non-collaborative, stop short of violating any law, whether it's a federal or a state law. And the question is, well, in those circumstances, what, if anything, can be done? Well, I don't have the answer. Everyone's grappling with that. But for example, I'll just use your faculty. In terms of tenured faculty members, if someone was to engage in that type of bullying, under the state law, the education code, those, in order to warrant a dismissal, that type of activity would have to rise, or rather sink, to the level of unprofessional conduct, which means you get a 60-day letter and you don't ever do it again. Immorality, which, as you know, is an impossible standard, or unfitness to serve. Well, people who are members of faculties all over the United States aren't fired for their talk, even when they hurt their colleagues. They're not fired because if there was any attempt to do so, the institution that they serve would be the subject of a lawsuit in a hot minute, because usually the conduct that is involved involves speech, harmful speech, hurtful speech, repulsive speech. But unless that speech is at a level where it crosses the line and violates an actual law, then there's little to be done about it. Now, I know, I'm aware, because I follow the activities here at the college, that your academic senate is very aware of this, what I'll call dichotomy, this problem, and is working on what can be done in terms of the code of ethics that everyone, the faculty and yourselves, are duty-bound to uphold. And so I wish them well and you well in the pursuit of that. But what I'm very afraid of, based on what we see nationally, regionally, and even here, is that there could be conflicts that occur that really do not have effective solutions. And a lot of that is because, unlike most of the rest of the world, that there is huge liberality in terms of allowing speech that is even repulsive or diabolical, as long as it doesn't cross that legal line. So, with that in mind, if we're talking about ethics, and we're talking about your board ethics right now, and I guess faculty ethics, the ethics of everybody here at the college, falls into the same general category. If there are no, what I'll call punitive sanctions, no significant sanctions, then why do you all need to really pay that much attention to it? Why not just throw out there whatever inclination you might have? And I think the answer is pretty obvious, because you're here, you were elected to serve primarily the best interests of the welfare of the students. And so, how is that accomplished? Is that accomplished by a factionalized board? Is that accomplished by a board that is engaged in strife with the faculty? or a faculty that's engaged in strife with itself. Again, I'm no expert in collegial affairs, but based on what I've seen, the answer is clearly no. So I looked on the internet for a few minutes this morning, and I saw report after report, and not just this mundane stuff that we sometimes read where it says it's better to be a collaborative board member, blah, blah, blah. But why is that? And so I saw a number of different studies at different levels. So for example, there was one that was a PhD thesis at Iowa State of all places, but this individual conducted a survey and contacted over 500 community college board members throughout the Midwest and asked what the most effective key was to making a difference in their leadership at the college, making a difference in terms of student outcomes, which after all is mainly what it's all about. And one of the top results there was that it was critical for the board to operate cohesively. And obviously that doesn't mean that everybody has to agree. In fact, you shouldn't agree. There needs to be different voices. But it's how those voices are expressed and how they're received by others that count. Because if you are going to be doing everything you can that's directed at the top priority of this institution, it is going to necessarily involve really complying, adhering as best as you possibly can to the ethics that are spelled out and, you know, pretty obvious things that are in your board policies. Why does it matter again? Well, it matters ultimately according to any number of different studies, and I've seen them. I'm not going to go through them, but they're all over the place on the K-12 map. Actually, the United States Department of Justice had one, and it talked about how coherence among school boards across the United States is one factor that really leads to the type of climate that can advance the safety of students at those institutions. And it goes on and on and on. Well, why else would it seem to be important for your board to adhere to its code of ethics and for the faculty to adhere to its code of ethics and so on? Well, obviously, this institution has a great deal to be immensely proud of, to have been awarded the Aspen Institute Prize, along with Walla Walla College, 4 years ago, something like that, is a remarkable achievement. And as you well know, that achievement didn't happen by itself. It took at least hundreds of people working together over a long period of time to build up the work of this college, the actual work that this college did, and thereby to build up and advance the reputation of the college to a point where it actually received that award. And you're still, obviously, and will be, for hopefully a very long time, held in the highest esteem everywhere. So I think that with this college having risen to that level, that it just emphasizes the fact that you are really building on your forebears, if you will. And for that reason, it's critically important that you sustain the efforts that so many people before you have made to maintain this institution at its extremely high and proud level. So what are the key things that actually go into what you would do as board members? And these things are reflected throughout the Code of Ethics and throughout other board policies. And again, you know, there are some ethical things that also have legal sanctions tied to it. So there are Brown Act things in your policies, there are conflict of interest things in your policies. But that's different because they do involve a reiteration of laws that are just incorporated. But in terms of your code of ethics, what are the things that stand out in terms of what you can do in order to be the most effective board possible? And it seems to me they fall into, well, 4 categories. One, I've already stated, and that's in BP 2715. It starts out, I think the very first bullet point is that the primary focus of the board is the educational welfare of your students. So it's always through the maze of so many other things that are going on, it's keeping everyone's eyes on the prize, which is the welfare of the students, and avoiding, if at all possible and to the extent possible, distractions from that mission. And your policies also make clear that the educational welfare of the students include equality and equal opportunity. And that's a huge part of the mission of this college, for which you have been, I believe, very successful in a number of endeavors. The next one, the second item, would be, these are my words, collectivism versus individuality, and that is that you act as a board, you act together. So obviously your policies say that none of you carry any authority as individual board members. You don't hold yourself out as speaking for the board unless you've been authorized to do so. You don't act like you have some individual badge that gives you the right to do anything outside of your collective action. Because it's not only that that's what's written down in these policies and written down in the education code, but again, more importantly, because that a cohesive board that acts collectively does a much more effective job in terms of furthering the welfare of the students and in its critical relationship with the faculty and other groups here at the college. The third item, it's pretty obvious. I broke it out: respect, high standards, and unity. Respect obviously goes to the way that you conduct your meetings, the way you deal with each other, the way that you deal with public speakers, your decorum, because decorum does count. There's no question about that. And I don't need to point out any examples of leaders who show poor decorum. I haven't watched the news yet tonight, so I'm sure I'll see some. I'm sure I'll see some new ones. And then the last one, again, is an obvious one, and that is that you do your jobs, with notable exceptions, from the 20,000-foot level and not from the weeds. And I think, from my experience in working with you for the last several years, 8 years now, I think that you do a good job of that and understand that you are policymakers and looking at overall issues having to do with the college. I know you supervise the college president and you do the critical role of the budget, but in many, many boards, the biggest problem they have is micromanagement, and that does not seem, at least from what I know, what I've been told, to be a critical issue. And I just don't think that I need to go through any of your policies, because you know how your policies and the code echo what we've just gotten through talking about. There are things that come up time and time again. They're just restated in different ways. And they are very typical. They come from California, the League of Community Colleges. They come from different sources. And the reason they're there is because for a very, very long time, they have been perceived as critical to successful leadership and guidance of college and universities around the United States. So I'm wondering if any of you have any questions or remarks before I turn to a, very brief highlighting some Brown Act matters.
Student
sir,
trustee
Mr.
Farmer,
Miller.
do you have any questions? Yes, trustee Miller.
I just want to thank you for that outline. I thought the four, I'm not sure what you call them, factors, or the four important elements you gave were very helpful. And I was particularly pleased that you relied on information from my alma mater, Iowa State University. So thank you.
I can't remember, the Hawkeyes, that's the
No,
university?
no, no.
What are
No,
you?
no,
one.
no. Be the Cyclones.
Oh, wow.
How timely. Exactly.
Trustee Nielsen.
Yes, I found it profound. Thank you. I always forget that. I found it profound that you started off talking about ethics. And then what it reminded me of is back in the late 60s when I was in college, and I had ethics was like a required course for what field I chose. But when I went to take the class, it had been canceled. They never brought it back. They quit teaching ethics. And apparently that happened pretty universally all over the place. They just quit teaching it, except at least at the college I was at, it wasn't offered at all. And so I never even learned the content of the class because I never got to take it. And the fact that it's so important, there was a reason why they were teaching that at the time, and I thought, well, if it was so important to teach a class on it, what makes it so obsolete now that they don't need to present it? Just an observation, a personal one of mine, so I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you very much. And when I was in school during that same period, they had stopped teaching it by then too. I was at Berkeley, and that was all about free speech. That was a big First Amendment time, as you well know. Ethics came up later in law school. I'm not sure how much good it did for many of my brethren, but I think you do a good job. So in terms of the Brown Act,
I'm sorry,
Oh,
not
I'm
trustee.
so very
Dr.
sorry.
Beebe
Yeah, I have a
had
question for you. You talked about free speech. When does free speech cross the line and become hate speech? And when it does cross that line and it becomes bullying, it becomes hurtful, in a very significant way, is there anything that can be done about that? We're seeing that in lots of places where free speech seems to be almost superseding letting people say just about anything they want anymore. Is that what it's all about?
well, it's certainly not about letting people say about anything that they want. But like I mentioned, there are standards that are, of course, in place in terms of what that conduct needs to look like in order for it to be sanctionable. So, there are two things that I'm thinking of right off the bat. But although many folks here may not be aware of it, you do forward us from time to time information concerning alarming situations where the type of conduct that you're talking about, sometimes just verbal, constituting threats, things that are taken very seriously, that instill fear in people, and ask us, as the college lawyers, what can be done about it. And it's not uncommon at all for us to go into the Superior Court and get a restraining order. In fact, that's common. I have somebody in my office that does that for Santa Barbara City College, Santa Barbara Unified, et cetera. Because what we do is gather up the facts and see whether the conduct that's in question will, if we bring it into court, meet the test that's required in order to get that restraining order, or even to invite some sort of an assault charge, whatever it might be. And as I think you know, Dr. Beebe, we are not the least bit timid when it comes to seeking a sanction or to protect individuals who have been abused when the law allows it, and we've also done it in borderline cases because we felt that it was just too important to take that step. And the other situation, of course, that's been talked about a lot nationally and here at the college has to do with Title IX violations. And when it comes to Title IX violations, it's not any harassing, discriminatory, mean-spirited speech, even if it's directed at gender groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, etc. The requirements are contained in case after case after case all over the United States. And we look at those cases when we are asked to evaluate whether something has risen to a level where the college can take effective action. And we work hard in that regard because, quite frankly, it puts the college on the knife's edge. And what I mean is that when you take a dramatic action against an individual, for example, who is accused of conducting her or himself in a way that is viewed as abusive and hurtful toward a protective group, if you take a severe sanction against that individual and you're wrong, then you are facing a very serious lawsuit that could result in very significant damages as well as attorney fees. And I'm sure you read about those in the newspaper. Blessedly, we do what we can to keep those legal fees down and to keep this college out of court. But as some of you know, at least, like Mr. Miller, I spent most of my career trying lawsuits in front of juries, and neither I nor other people in my office are afraid to, in effect, take up arms and go after it. But we need to be sure, and we evaluate it, and as you know, in certain cases where we are looking for as much objectivity as we can possibly find, we've gotten approval from you and your administration to go outside, whether it's to use a retired administrative law judge or in another case to use an esteemed retired California appellate judge. And so those are the kind of measures that we take to try and do our utmost for the college to protect individuals to the extent that the law allows us, but we can't exceed that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for protecting our mission for the sake of our community.
It's just an interesting observation. As we seek to address concerns in society by the crafting of law, we seem to invite the counter suit. Do you see what I'm getting at? We craft law to protect people or classes of people from hate speech, and I think the original question was to define the distinction or that fine line where you cross over and it is hate speech. And the fact that such a line is so difficult to define means that you're overly cautious in defining it or in saying this is a case involving hate speech because you're now afraid of a lawsuit that says no, you were in error. This is not hate speech.
You're absolutely right. And the best that we can do is to maintain awareness of where the law is, not just by looking at the statutes and so on, but by reading the same decisions that guide the judges that try those cases and seeking to anticipate what would happen if somebody then brought a case against us or another group I represent, for example, for retaliation for violations of the First Amendment and so on. And, you know, there are gray areas certain times, and in those instances where there are gray areas, there's a great deal of discussion that goes into it. But the interest, I know, of this administration and of your board is to always lean in the direction of upholding the rights and protecting individuals, whether they're students or whether they're faculty members or whether they're outside people who are affected by college personnel, to protect those individuals as fully as is possible.
Without recourse to the law. Because when we do that, it's almost as if it might have been better not to have had the law, just so you can go up to the individual and just say, look, that's hate speech. And I don't have to be afraid of retaliation. That's simply my opinion.
Well, so for example, veering into the Brown Act, one of the things that you know is that when people give public comments, they have wide latitude. And there are cases, there was a federal case actually that kind of led the way, that said that free speech gives people the right to come in here and during their 5 minutes to say the most hateful, vengeful, mean, nasty, bigoted things that they want to, unless they are attacking individuals, attacking board members, attacking staff members. And all that boards and staff can do is to advise them that if they're bringing a complaint, that there are other ways that they should proceed. But you can't stop them. And it's not that dissimilar when it comes to what it is that we're talking about. And it's very frustrating. I don't have any magic bullet answers, except I think that because these things do happen, they have happened, and they're going to continue to happen from time to time, despite, I'm sure, the Academic Senate's best efforts at crafting some modifications to the Code of Ethics. For people on both sides of the dais, the board, the administration, the faculty, the classified staff, for everyone to be as fully aware as possible and to appreciate the impossibility that some of these situations bring up, as frustrating as it is. And I think that involves, real collaboration and talking and sharing. But then again, we're hampered by another thing, because everybody wants transparency. I know as board members, I've heard from, I think, each of you, almost each of you, that you really do wish for there to be maximum transparency. And I know Dr. Beebe has expressed that outside of things that he's sent around to the entire college, to me personally, sometimes in a context where he's very frustrated because of the limitations that exist on transparency. But when we're dealing with personnel issues, we can't. The law doesn't permit disclosure of, exactly what's going on. If there are certain types of investigations, the law doesn't permit it. And if investigation reports are released, it doesn't come from this college. And so sometimes it's very difficult to be able to explain why certain things are occurring or being handled in the way that they are. And as much as anybody else, when I read about other groups in the newspaper and the institution or the agency, whoever it is, says no comment, I mean, it's frustrating as hell, frankly. But what are you going to do about it? Because you are constrained. I think the only thing you can do about it is to make sure that people are aware that that restraint is not out of anybody wanting to hide anything, but rather it's based upon the fact that in many instances, your hands are just completely tied. It's that simple.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you have somebody that makes a public comment, and it is just over the top, and we want to debate that person that's up there where you are now. And we start a dialogue with that individual after a public comment, and it goes on for 15, 20 minutes into areas that aren't anywhere listed on any agenda anywhere. Is that a problem with the Brown Act?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's why we don't comment. I mean, that's the essence of it, right?
Absolutely. The widespread practice is that you don't respond to public comments, period. And the reason for that is because if the board were to engage in a colloquy about some particular issue that comes up, because it only comes up under public comment, it hasn't been agendized. And if you wade into an issue that hasn't been agendized, then you are vulnerable to a Brown Act challenge.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? It means that I would receive, well, first of all, it can mean two different things, because the Brown Act is commonly used as a means of embarrassing an institution. So somebody goes to the press, and there's a big story about how the board violated the Brown Act. I would have gone to the meeting, I would have engaged in the debate, I would have brought people, I would have furnished information, but they went ahead and had this big debate without me, even though you didn't take action. And we see that a lot of those challenges are made during election season because it's a way to challenge the correctness of another candidate. But in addition to that, what it has meant on many occasions over the last, 20-some years that I've been doing this is that I'll get a letter from the district attorney's office out of the blue that said, you have been accused, your board has been accused of violating the Brown Act, and here's what's been reported to us, and blah, blah, blah. And I need to have your explanation of this conduct within 10 days or something like that. Now, the Brown Act is called, it's actually the Ralph Brown Act from, I think, 1954. And one of the first ones I handled was a complaint that was made against the involvement of an individual whose name was Ralph Brown. And I sort of thought that was ironic, but, and these things can be problematic because under the Brown Act, as you know, it is actually a crime. It's a misdemeanor. The jails are not full of Brown Act violators. No, they're not. But it's hugely embarrassing to an organization when there are violations that are found. The district attorney's office, as a condition of settlement, will require various options that it has, and will follow up and will review agendas and that kind of thing. But it's a serious problem, and that's why your staff, whenever they have questions about, the propriety of certain actions or can we do this, are we able to discuss this in closed session, for example, and then I have to be the bad cop or one of my partners, say, no, I know you want to, but you can't because it's personnel. And the personnel exception, meaning you can have a closed session, it's not for the purpose of hiding anything from the board. The law says that individuals who are being looked at, let's say, in connection with some employment issue, have the right to have their privacy protected. And therefore, it's their right, it's not yours, to take it into closed session. And in fact, in a situation where some outsider, not as part of the regular evaluation process, somebody files some kind of complaint or charges against an employee, if that employee wants to have the matter aired in public before, God and country, then they have the right to do that. And that employee has to be given a written notice before that board meeting saying, you have the right to have this heard in public. Well, for reasons that are fairly obvious, rarely is that ever heard.
Can I ask a question?
But
Go.
you can't engage in debate, but you can ask questions of public comment speakers to clarify what they mean.
Well, I think there's an ambiguity there because, as you well know, asking people questions is a sideways opportunity to engage in a discussion, the Socratic method and all that kind of thing. So if you're asking for a clarification, I mean, that's something. But I mean, the point is, if there is a topic that's raised by through public comments, the recognized best practice is to ask that the matter be agendized for discussion and bring it back so there can be an adequate discussion. But in direct answer to your question, is there anything wrong or illegal with asking somebody a question? No, not per se. There's not, except that if you do it, then that is going to lengthen the public comment, and then it's going to invite one of your fellow board members to ask their own question, and so on. So it's kind of like the Brown Act, when you have serial communications. It's okay for one board member to send out, let's say, an email to everybody else, blah, 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 because if one person does it, there is no collective concurrence of a quorum of the board. But as soon as that email goes out, somebody else then writes back and says, well, I don't think we should do that. And then somebody else says something else. And boom, even though the person that started it didn't intend for there to be any kind of a collective concurrence, they opened the door and everybody else waded in. So the short answer is no, there's nothing illegal or wrong, but I would just urge, like I do other boards, to be very cautious about doing that because of what I just described.
Craig, or do you want to go?
Kind of related to that, if the board as a whole is in the position of being a decision maker in a grievance or a claim at some point down the road, and this is going along in process, it's my understanding that it would be inappropriate for board members to comment on their opinions about that matter while it is in process and before it has reached them. Because in effect, you are kind of putting your finger on the scale of justice there and saying, when it gets to me, this is what I'll be thinking, or something along those lines. Would you care to comment?
Well, it would sort of be like asking Brett Kavanaugh how he intended to vote once he got confirmed on a certain pending matter before the court. I mean, he's very closed-mouthed about a lot of things, but certainly everybody would agree that the example I just gave would be inappropriate. And when you get an appeal on a grievance, for example, you are in effect the judges. And when you hear an appeal, it is to be based on the record that you are given, as opposed to some independent third-hand knowledge you have or making your own investigation. That's totally, inappropriate. That's why, for example, if you've ever been on jury duty, the judge every day says, now, don't read the newspaper, don't do this, don't do that, don't talk among yourself, because you're just supposed to rely on what it is that's put before you. So everybody has exactly the same information and can interact together in order to formulate the fairest and the best decision.
Thank you. Craig, at the board chair workshop last year in Sacramento, the question came up of, digital age and communication, and there's certainly various modalities to do that. The specific question that was raised was, what does the superintendent president or the chair of the board do when there is text messaging communication going on between board members at the board meeting?
Why would I want to do that?
Wow.
But I don't, I could.
I thought you were going to ask a different question, because I was at a Santa Barbara Unified Board member meeting a few years ago, and I was texting. I mean, I was just sitting in the audience, and I was probably texting my wife about, what time I was going to be home for dinner.
Yeah.
And some woman started yelling, "He's texting!
Yeah.
He's texting!" I said, I give up.
And you guys all now know the alert to my children because they override silence, the da-da-da, but yeah.
Well, the answer to that is that it's not a Brown Act violation, because a Brown Act violation involves a collective concurrence of a quorum. So if there's only two people that are doing it, then obviously that's not going to be a quorum unless they're doing it in some sort of a chain fashion. Jonathan, I'll vote yes if you will. Peter, I'll vote yes, but that's pretty unlikely. But beside the Brown Act issue, what it gets back to is proper protocol, and the public would have every right to harshly criticize, I think, because they expect that during the course of a board meeting, that all of the discussion that occurs on the part of board members is going to be shared with all board members, so they all have the same information. And so when decisions are made, it's going to be made on an equivalent basis.
It'd be interesting to know which colleges have policies in place. It was definitely a hot topic at the board chair workshop, and some were considering policies, Dr. Beatty, some didn't have them, some hadn't thought about it. I was like, what? You would conduct the public business in front of the public, but in your digital device, which was just as much of a...
Another hot topic that I've had come up twice in the last month has to do with the board taking an action on some particular item with a minority of trustees that disagreed, and then the minority trustees go out and publicly speak. So I had one example, I can give it without naming names because it wasn't in Santa Barbara, where a large board, in a large area, voted to deny a particular charter school. And then the two members who thought that it should be approved went up to Sacramento and testified before the State Board of Education what their views were, and the state board approved the charter. And so the majority was absolutely furious. And when I had the opportunity, if you want to call it that, to speak to them 2 weeks ago tonight on ethics, two board members were yelling at one another about this very same thing. And that, that's a difficult situation. But again, we really do get back to free speech, because if you're in the minority on a position, nevertheless, you have the right, the absolute right, to speak out about it, no matter how oppositional it may seem. But the rule is, and it's in your policies, and it's pretty obvious, if a board member elects to do that, you need to make it abundantly clear that you are speaking as an individual, not as a representative of the board. And sometimes we see people that kind of fudge it. It'll have their name and it'll say board member somewhere. Well, does that create an impression that they're really acting on behalf of the board? Or I think it does in some people's minds. And in fact, I crafted language for this group that said, although individuals have the free speech right to voice their position, they should basically think long and hard about doing that and limit it to things that are really important, because when the board, lacks cohesion, it does minimize the impact of the board. Because, believe it or not, and in spite of all the 5-4 decisions of the United States Supreme Court, the chief justices of the court and other justices always seek to try and get a unanimous decision. And most decisions are, quite frankly. They just don't get reported, and they're not ordinarily the ones of enormous impact, because when the court speaks with unanimity, the decisions that they make are better received out in the hinterlands around the country. And we obviously know what happens with these 5-4 decisions, and they're unfortunate. And I think there are some parallels to be drawn in terms of cohesion of your board, community college boards, school boards across the country. I think I may have overshot my mark here, Dr. Beebe.
It's okay, you did a good job.
So well needed and a lot cheaper than all 8 of us flying somewhere to get it, because the expertise in-house are excellent. So thank you, Dr. Beebe, for Angie arranging that. Does anybody have any more questions? Brown Act. And these are recorded. We can always reference. Question?
I was just going to say thank you. It's an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then just before you go, I remember you had told us once, when someone does a Public Records Act, does that include our text messages too?
Include what?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Didn't used to be that way, but the California Supreme Court sat on a San Jose case for over 2 years, struggling with how to decide it. And at the end of the day, they decided that school board member emails, even on their private email, were subject to Public Record Act request and text messages. And I happen to have, well, I'm not doing it myself. Fortunately, I have somebody that has fewer gray hairs than I do that's primarily working on it. But we're in litigation, and we're having to retrieve from all board members emails and text messages. And it's really, really hard. I don't mean it's hard to get it from the board members, but when the school stuff or the college stuff is mixed up with all of your personal stuff, it's very difficult. So at least one board I'm working with has adopted the internal policy of having board members just use the college email address or the school district email address, because that stuff's on the server, and if there is a lawsuit, it can be pulled down. It can save a great deal of time and expense. And
Thank you.
the moral of the story is, as one superintendent told me yesterday, you don't need to worry about that, Craig, because I never put anything in an email or a text that I wouldn't want to see in the
Cover
newspaper.
news press.
I call people up, and sometimes I make 10 of the same calls. It's hard to do, though. Okay, well, thank you. You've been
Thank
very
you.
attentive. Okay.
Yeah. We haven't had that in a while. Have we? Like individually, but collectively?
Yeah, I think we used to, I've forgotten.
We got off our
At the
cycle.
beginning, yeah, but I
That's
think
like,
it's-
I think in a year and a half, maybe.
Very valuable, because, and I've been in this business a long time, but you learn something each time, and it's good to have that.
Or remember things.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Thank you.
that concludes our discussion item on the Brown Act and Ethics Review. That brings us to item 9.2, Board of Trustees Goals. This is an item for action and discussion. There really is no option. I guess there is an option, but we'd like to approve these to move forward. Let's, can we hear from Peter, it's Trustee Miller, Trustee Haslan, and Trustee Aboud on sort of,
Sure.
the work of the ad
We
hoc?
ordinarily, and I said this to my two colleagues with whom I worked, the worst thing you can do is try to write a document by committee. But in our case, it went fairly smoothly, and I was pleasantly surprised, and it worked well. And in the end, what we did was to write short paragraphs under each of the capital headings, and then we organized them not necessarily in terms of their relative importance, but by alphabetical order, so that we would take that out of the equation.
Trustee Miller, any?
I don't have much to add, other than we did our best to incorporate the draft that we had at the last meeting. And in other comments or ideas that I think had been expressed at our Friday morning meeting. And at the same time, trying not to make it too complex and lengthy. And I think all three of us were pretty happy with what we arrived at.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I think it does reflect, for the most part, what we talked about on August 10th. One change that I would suggest, I think I may have missed this when you sent me the final version, so I apologize for that, but in the first one, where it says the board development one, I think we should put, it was in many drafts, it just wasn't in the last one, of putting in cultural competency training for the board. I know the UC Regents recently went over that, so if they're doing that, I think it's worth for us to say we're committing to do it as a goal. So I think just saying training is not specific enough. I think that's a very specific, like, professional development is also training, so maybe just say professional development and cultural competency training would be my only edit.
I'd like to learn more about that. I think the article, if you guys read the article from the Santa Barbara Unified, and Santa Barbara Unified has had a big focus on, you know, cultural proficiency and all these different things from the superintendent down to the staff level. And a longstanding community partner that has traditionally worked with the district for a number of years now, that MOU was tabled yesterday because there was some legal things that were brought up by a member of the public. And so the board decided to table that until further, probably, information from legal counsel. So I think that can go in many ways. And had I not read that, you know, news article and kind of seen what unfolded at the Tuesday night board meeting downtown, I think it's something to watch in terms of learning from our community partners of what they're doing in that area.
Okay, I'm not sure, is it like an internal cultural proficiency thing or like a board training thing?
No, it was a full-on, it's in their LCAP goal and everything. It's a full-on, yeah. Anyway, that was just my thought in terms of what that would look like, and I don't know that we know what that looks like right now.
Well, would the current language preclude such training?
No,
No.
I don't think it doesn't, but I guess, like, you can say that fallacy about almost anything, like, would this preclude that? But I think putting something in is like an intentional act of saying X is important, and we think that is important. So you could make all of these more generalized, but I think that's an important thing. We struggled with some of these issues over the past year, so I think it's good to just, that's a thing to learn more about and train ourselves on.
I'm sorry.
Please, go.
Yeah, I tend to think there are a lot of important things specific kinds of training we could list. I personally prefer leaving it as it is. Without having, I mean, if we're going to have something specific, I guess I'd like to see a list of the 25 other kinds of training that might be important as well. So I certainly don't have anything against cultural competency training, but I prefer to leave it more general and broad as it is.
I mean, I get that, like, you could list 25 things for everyone, like, for everything you can say, well, we can expand that. But if you think about it this way too, our money is coming in from having a diverse student body, and I think one way we can encourage a successful diverse student body is by being very competent on those issues ourselves so that when we make decisions over the next year, we're making decisions that encourage a more successful and diverse student body. So I don't know if it's, again, like you could say that about all of these topics. Is okay, we can, in the community engagement, you can say, let's list all the stakeholders, or instead of internally a wider community, let's list them all. Like, oh no, we decided to narrow that. In equity, we listed some specific programs. We could have listed 10 more. But I think this is a specific piece to our job, is to be promoting a more diverse and successful student body, and our decisions trickle down. I think Veronica's been very clear with that. It's like any action we take, however small we might think it is, it has a big impact down the line. So I think we need to be culturally competent to make good decisions that encourage a successful and diverse student body.
Okay, is there any interest in adding that? One, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan, many of the points he made. I think it's important, especially in the times SBCC is in, and we lack that, definitely, that training on the cultural competency piece. So I think it's important to add.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, so we'll move on and leave it as is. Moving on to the other goals, civil discourse, they're in alphabetical order, very thoughtful. Although civil, the reading teacher in me, I'm kidding. Anybody have any thoughts on the remaining goals? So Marty, you weren't here at the last one, but you probably saw the original ones, and you have now both. You have everything.
I was pleased after that discussion at the last meeting. You know, I wasn't privileged to have that draft right then, and I wasn't following what you all were saying. But I looked at this, and it's so straightforward and concise that it's something, I really like it, so I appreciate it. But it's funny, the old third grade teacher in me, I did not notice they were alphabetized. Just totally, but good idea, you know, why not? We tended to, in the past, put things in priority order, kind of what do we want to do first and that sort of thing. I think this is fine, though. It's just, we have so many of them, but I think it's okay, so,
Well, I think we tried to cope with that
yeah.
by being brief, being concise,
Which you were,
so that you could actually read the whole document and not feel exhausted. And the problem with establishing a list that is in priority order is, I'm sure that the three of us would have different priorities.
I know.
And with 8 of us, we would certainly have different priorities. So this seemed like a simple solution to an otherwise vexing problem. So unless there's objection, I'd like to move adoption.
Second?
Okay, it's, well, I guess we kind of got into discussion, the move second. So it's been moved by trustee Hadlin and seconded by trustee Bloom to adopt the Board of Trustees 2018-19 annual goals. We will continue with the discussion. Yes, student trustee Farmer.
So a lot of these goals, are they going to be surrounded around training as well?
Well, we don't get into the what, we just, like, or the how. So the how is delegated over to Dr. Beebe and his team.
Okay, could Dr. Beebe, are a lot of these goals going to be surrounded around training as well? Like, I'm looking at the civil discourse and respect for others. So we would support ongoing efforts to facilitate an environment that promotes civil discourse and respect for persons with differing opinions. I know we've had an issue with that on campus as well. Are we going to bring in, if these are goals
Yeah.
that we have, are we
I
going to
mean,
be looking
I
towards
would-
bringing?
Yeah.
Can I finish my point? Thanks.
I would
Can I finish my point?
wait for that conversation probably to happen until we adopt them. I think it would be pretty preliminary, Dr. Beebe, if you,
Well, I can just answer that question
Thank you.
quickly. Yes, we will be having trainings around these areas. I think that's going to be an important component of all of this.
Yeah. Is there an issue with me finishing my points? in the
no, I
meeting?
apologize.
Okay, thank you, Veronica.
So you guys, the only thing with these goals is that I think it's a lot. And they're all, yeah, and they're all, as Trustee Miller said, it's, we could list all the things that we want to do and all the amazing things, and certainly the institution has made a tremendous progress, at least in the last 5 years, and certainly in the last 8 years, I think, for you guys. It's a lot, and I don't know that that I would put this forth, this many, for this coming year. I think, and it's not like this is not good or that this is not what we should do. I was thinking about this similar to when we were thinking about the bond for the last bond we just had. And my thinking then was that it wasn't good, it just was not now. And when I look at this, my gut's kind of telling me that this is a lot, and maybe all of this is not for now. So I'm just not comfortable putting this much on the institution now. Especially because like I said, I haven't attended all the guided pathways, but I have been following a lot of the literature and, certainly the different inbox emails that come in. And if the guided pathways, as one of 20 that we are, is, it seems to be promising. It's a huge undertaking. The new funding model is a huge undertaking. So with those two things, I know, as you said, the guided pathways, Jonathan, it's student-centered, it's equity in mind. I would almost yield, I want to just leave it, narrow this, and make the bulk the guided pathways, knowing that a lot of these things that we are so passionate about and have been following are going to organically flow into guided pathways, and I would rather give leeway for you guys to take the time to do that and really focus 150, 20, 200% on that. That's just my thinking. Like I said, it's not that this is not good. I just feel like this is too much, and it's not now.
I mean, I'm looking at our old board goals, and they seem just as extensive. If anything, we've condensed some things into some topics, and these are things that we do all the time. So fiscal is always going to be a thing that we're dealing with, but we're now stating our vision for fiscal. Housing is always an issue. We're stating our vision for housing. We're not telling the college to do anything new in any of this. Now we're creating a list of 15 new projects for Anthony to undertake, but we're telling Anthony in these areas that you're already doing your job in, this is our vision, and so come back to us with your plan on how to execute that, because, that's just the process that happens at every institution. Is the board sets its goals, and the executive says how they're going to do it. But we're doing equity work, we're doing facility work, we're doing fiscal work already, but this is us providing our guidance for how it should all play out. And also, to now pick what we're going to cut by a committee of the whole would be, again, like the same problem we had last time. And we've already had 2 subcommittees present this as the work, and at our retreat, we'd never said we wanted to narrow down to 1. So I think we should just go with what the committee has recommended at this point. Or we can delay it again to figure out what to cut, but I don't know. We spent a lot of time on this already, and I don't want to bring this back myself.
Yes, Trustee Haslam.
I'd like to chime in.
Yes, Dr. Beebe.
I just wanted to say that I agree with Jonathan that in many ways, we're doing this work. There's a lot of things here, but we're doing this work. There's some other things that, like housing and others, that we would want to explore deeper, but this isn't anything, there's nothing here that's out of the realm in terms of what we're already doing. I understand the emphasis on guided pathways, for example, but we're going to be putting that emphasis on guided pathways. So this isn't anything, there isn't anything here that's, way out too crazy. I would also like to, just if I may, go back to the idea of the training piece and, some of the emphasis that we're going to be having on our new funding formula, for example, on underrepresented students, on low-income students, on poverty. These are things that are substantially and critically important to the institution. And I think that we need to have a full understanding, the board needs to have a full understanding of what that means. And so I think training in those areas would not hurt us or would not be a bad thing. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Okay, any other thoughts?
I
Yeah.
think our set of goals is kind of a printed reminder of what we said was important. But there's no check box on the right side that says we actually accomplished this. There's no litmus test for success. It's a guide because we're human beings and we tend to forget stuff. So this is something that allows us not to forget.
Yeah.
And maybe to be useful in reminding each other of what we said was important.
Yes, Trustee Miller.
I agree with that, and I think that if a year from now, when we're working on, or 11 months from now, when we're working on goals for the next year, it would not surprise me if we ended up with almost the same goals again. Because these are aspirational. These are things that we probably never achieve the perfection that we want. And as somebody else said, or President Beebe said, these are the things we're already doing. These are the things we want to continue doing, and I expect a year from now we'll want to continue doing. So
Yeah. Yes, Trustee Nielsen.
It is a long list. Again, it is a long list. And, but what it means to me is, and how I use this list every year when we do this, is what it does is it reminds me what my fellow board members are concerned about, because everybody had input into this, and we have all these points, and we know what everybody's concerned about, even if we're not all concerned equally about all the different items. We at least have this list, and we know the board's interested in it. It's, it's how you define what the list of the board's goals is. If you set goals that have a specific target in mind, and you set a few of those, and you do that, we could do something like that in addition. This, as it stands, in this trustee's opinion, is valuable.
Okay, well, yes, Trustee Carney.
And I was just going to add to what others have said, which is that we have that opportunity in about a year to look back at these goals and talk among ourselves about how has the year developed and what have we accomplished, and then we look forward again to the next set of goals. So in that sense, it's exactly what you're talking about, Peter. We remind ourselves what we said and wanted to do.
Okay, so, yeah, I think they're great, the work. I still think it's not now, so I will have to vote against it, because I think with that bond, that's really what I felt. I felt like this is not now, it was just a lot, and, but I, went ahead.
That's a very different.
No, I know. I think what I'm alluding to is just it feels, and I think part of it is my lens, because I do work for a school district. And so I think, I think when I sit here, I think of the faculty in the classroom, I think of the staff, and I think of all of that, and I think, my gosh, this is quite a lot. And it's good. It's great stuff. My goodness, like you said, we've been at this for so many years and so much progress. But it's 2 pages. Yeah, so... Yes, Student Trustee Farmer.
I'm confused because before I spoke, I thought we were about to move to approve it, and then you.
Yeah, we're going to
said-
move to approve it.
Oh, okay. So
Did you have any other comments? No? Okay. So seeing as there is no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Aye. Abstain? Okay, motion carries. Okay, that brings us to item 9.3. And if you guys will bear with me, I'll read what this action and discussion item is, only for those folks in the public that maybe won't read this, who knows? But this is establishment of an ad hoc committee of the board to address moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversations on difficult subjects. In addition to. Trustee Marjorie Croninger and Robert Miller are proposing the formation of an ad hoc committee of the board on moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversations on difficult subjects. Both Trustee Miller and Trustee Croninger have volunteered to serve on this committee. They believe that it is important for the board to work together with Dr. Beebe and the college governing groups to lead the college forward to solutions that address concerns we have all heard raised in board meetings and elsewhere on campus. The ad hoc committee would work directly with Dr. Beebe, draw upon the expertise of other college governance groups, and allow for listening as well as encouraging input for ideas that can move us forward in a setting which is not a formal public meeting. As in the past, the committee would develop a scope for its work. Specific outcomes would depend on the scope of the work and the results of its work, but should include topics like, number one, recommendations on positive steps to assure gender equity and address sexual harassment. Two, training in Title IX standards and procedures, sexual harassment, academic freedom, and free speech. Three, methods and procedures to reassure all participants of fair and objective decision-making with regard to complaints of sexual harassment, discrimination, or unprofessional conduct. Specific procedures and recommendations for how to have respectful conversations on difficult subjects. Maintaining a campus that is welcoming to diverse students and ideas. And last but not least, measuring success. In addition to Dr. Beebe, Trustee Croninger and Trustee Miller envision soliciting representatives from the Academic Senate, the Faculty Association, California School Employee Association, CSEA, Advancing Leadership Association, and the Student Government and the SBCC Foundation to be consultants working with the ad hoc committee. So that was a lot, but that gives you the background for why this item is before you today. I would be more than delighted to say, or am delighted that you would so willingly volunteer to do this. It is an ad hoc, so we could have a third person. I imagine the scope and the nature of this work is not going to be a light committee, so I imagine this is going to be work in the morning, midday, evening, wherever the audience and the group is for this. Trustee Hasland, would you be interested in joining them?
No, I think I'm not sure what I'm volunteering for in terms of the time.
You didn't
as
hear
you
what I
just
said.
described it. But yes, this is really an important thing that we need to do. And I would certainly encourage others from the campus community to be a part of this.
Does anybody have any thoughts on this committee and wanting to?
Yeah, so in this letter that we had from the science department, it says that there's like a gender equity work group on campus already. So I want to ask how this would be different and how it would interact with that campus-based group or that already exists.
Well, I think to start off, this would actually give us the ability to go and start the work. I think that as board members, we can't necessarily just show up on campus. So I think this would be the first step to maybe, I don't know, Marcia, what you envision to try to address and work with folk. We just read it, so I'm assuming if it's a group from campus, wherever it may be, it's included.
I think it's a fair question, but maybe you should be given a
Well-
chance
Go ahead,
to
Marcia.
respond.
Well, we operate at the board policy level, but we also, rather like the legislature, have a fact-gathering role sometimes to support those policies. And I would envision that the existing committee would do exactly what it's doing and would be informing us of what that is, perhaps. So we're better informed to understand what the policies might need to be added, to be amended, and that sort of thing. I think a big component of this is listening. We have had people coming to us over the last months expressing their concerns, but I think there's a lot more listening to be done, and that informs us as well. So,
Well, I just wanted to emphasize what you started off with, which is, making sure that this stays at the policy level. When we get some of the college groups involved, I think that the tendency may be for the board to slip into some operational kinds of things. So I think that needs to be at the fore of all your thinking. So I'm glad you started off your comment with the idea that this is a board policy level committee and not an operational committee, and one to learn from the existing gender equity committee, but not to supersede it, not to interfere with its work or be involved with it at that level. I mean,
No,
it's doing good work, and we wouldn't want to interrupt that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're pretty sensitive on this board to that distinction between operational and policy. At the same time, I think we could benefit by having that interaction in a much less structured and setting than we have now, and I've seen that happen before, where the analogy a little bit is to the subcommittees we used to have. Now, those were public meetings. This would not be a public meeting, but there was a lot more informal give and take, and people felt like they could talk more freely about their concerns. And then as operational things come out of that, that would go to whoever's area that is. That's not for us to decide.
Trustee Farmer, Student Trustee Farmer.
I just have a few concerns. I'm just concerned about thinking about how beneficial this committee will be, just because, reading this letter, these have been long, ongoing issues that people have came forward and gone through the processes and done their grievances, came to the board, made public comments, and nobody did anything about it. Nobody made any comments. So I'm wondering, what is the board, as far as you and Robert that are going to be leading this, what do you guys intend to do that you already haven't done? Because, we've read this letter. It's not all news to anyone about this stuff that's been going on. So I'm just very concerned with continuing to make committees that still don't do anything about the issues that we're having on this campus. Because we're quick to make a committee, and we're quick to make these work groups, but they're not doing anything, and it's not helping anything. So,
Thank you, Student Trustee Farmer. Thoughts, Trustee Miller and Trustee Bloom?
I just have a number of things I want to say about this, because I've given a lot of thought to it since it was first suggested, and I think it's an important thing for us to do. I support this proposal because I think it's time we move forward and find ways to address these and other difficult, contentious issues without rancor and disrespect of others. All the time required to focus on recent contentious issues is time not spent helping students succeed. I support this proposal because I want the board to learn whether there are policies we need to add or can change to help President Beebe and his administration address the next contentious issues they will face. We have no intention with this proposal to interfere with or supplant efforts by President Beebe, the administration, or other participatory governance groups to do their job, as so well communicated by President Beebe in his Waypoint email today. Likewise, we have no intention to interfere with or supplant similar efforts by other groups on campus. And I'm confident in saying that the entire board has enormous respect for the job that President Beebe and his administration has done the past 6 months under extraordinary circumstances. During my long professional life in government, politics, and the law, I've been exposed to all variety of leaders, but I can't recall any who possessed the many leadership skills of President Beebe. Every day he finds new ways to support and encourage the faculty, staff, and students at this college. I support this proposal because I'm confident the board wants to help and will act within its role. We can't predict what new policies or policy amendments we will propose, but I can predict we won't discover any if we don't try. And that's why I think it's a good idea for us to have an ad hoc committee to listen and to consider ways that we at a policy level can make a positive contribution for this college.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. Trustee Bloom?
I have some very mundane questions, and the first one is, we already have an ad hoc committee, and I haven't seen anything coming back from them. It seems to me that the difference between an ad hoc committee and a standing committee is that the standing committee has to be under the Brown Act. We should have asked Craig this when he was here. Under the Brown Act, so notice meetings and so on. Ad hoc committees, usually there's a limited number of meetings maybe 3 or 4, having to do with a specific subject. And then they come back and report back. And I would be, you know, it doesn't matter to me what, well, I shouldn't, I don't mean this. No matter what the subject matter is, I would not like to have an ad hoc committee out there for another year and a half, and we don't get a report back. I think it's really important that it be real specific. The idea of establishing an ad hoc committee to address moving forward in gender equity that's huge. And I don't quite understand, you know, putting 3 of us out there to do that and then not having an end meeting. Anyway, I really feel like this needs to be, I understand the need for that kind of dialogue, especially respectful conversation on difficult subjects, but I don't think that, I don't think it would be useful for the rest of the board to be waiting for a report back, which could be another year and a half or something like that. And to know that you're out there doing these things and the faculty's already doing them in another way, I would be very nervous about it.
So Trustee Bloom is citing BP 2220, which is committees of the board, and ad hoc committees are limited in duration, for specific tasks, as opposed to standing committees. Thank you for bringing that, because we do want this to be an authentic focus. Would it be, I mean, I guess, you know, the motion really is recommended to approve. I mean, could we add in there that it be a part of ongoing reporting back to the board type of thing, so it doesn't just get lost type
I
of thing?
think it would be very important to check that with Craig, because, you know, with the attorney, because, you know, you just have them come back every once in a while. You know, that's not, I think then you've got a standing committee. I really think that this is, and I know I'm getting kind of technical here, and I don't probably have all the answers, for sure. But I'm just, I think that you're playing with fire a little bit here.
So would the board be comfortable if this goes out, like, you guys go out, and then sort of, I'm assuming you have to get a sense that you don't know anything, because you can't from this table. And so that once they get out there, that then you can come back and we can make it a standing committee, so then there would be minutes and it would be all of that. Like that maybe the duration of this would really be a short duration, and say, you know, it's evident that, you know, as Marty's pointing out, there is benefit to a standing committee. Would the board be comfortable with something like, I mean, is that sort of, I mean, I know what you're saying, but I'm trying to think of, is that another option? Because I see what Marty's saying, that this could quickly turn into a standing committee. The only person who hasn't had a chance to comment is Trustee Nielsen. Trustee Nielsen, do you have any thoughts before I invite our public? Yes.
Yes. I got to make sure this thing's on like it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have a concern in the lines, but, well, like what Trustee Bloom said. The purpose, this is a list of topics. The purpose is noble. I'd be a little confused between this becoming like an investigation, like as if we're like we're some kind of grand jury and we're going to send this team of 3 people to study this and come back, but that's not what we do here. And I'd like to see a time frame, like, you know, you want to look this stuff up, I want to see distribution of the information so that we can all see it, and I'd like to see some kind of time frame, you know, like a 90-day reporting thing or something like that, you know, that has to be met, and like some kind of results, like maybe a list of the information that you've put together or discovered, or where you want to go, goals. We're limited. We can't. You know, what about the whole board does it?
You
You know,
can't-
if it's just fact collecting, why don't we all collect the facts? And we might come to quicker that way. And some people would be heroes and come up with most of the information. That's the way I kind of feel about it. I don't feel qualified to research and do everything on all those different subjects. I think it requires some expertise that I don't possess, and I don't know if any one particular board member has all those things, but some of you might come closer than me. In fact, I know some of you do.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to invite Cornelia, who submitted. Yeah, we've all had
Well, I
we're not
just
done
wanted-
discussing, but.
I know, I just wanted, before we got too far down the road, I just wanted to say that I think Marty might not have been here when that committee reported back, because it did. We reported back a long list of things that the committee had recommended, and we agreed that we might have later agenda items on some of those specific items.
Okay,
So,
good.
yeah, so I just didn't want to, that was a
Senior moment or something.
yeah. It might, well, you may have been, on vacation or something, so I don't
Just
remember.
missed one meeting, but okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
And the length of it also had to do with the fires
I
and the
know,
floods,
I'm gonna.
frankly.
Oh, I don't, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine, but
Okay, so we do have two comments. You've all had a chance to speak. We're not closing discussion, but I do want to invite Cornelia to speak. And then after that, Patricia Stark.
Honorable members of the Board of Trustees, President Gallados, Dr. Bibi. Thank you for allowing me to comment on the plan to establish an ad hoc committee to address moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversation on difficult subjects. I would like to express the Faculty Association support for this idea, and there might be advantages for a subcommittee over an ad hoc committee, but fact is, at a significant number of board meetings this spring, we saw faculty and students coming to these meetings and speak to you about severe troubles they had experienced in these areas. The problem with our board meetings here is this pretty unflexible setup, which is mainly due to Brown Act requirements, and we just heard a bit about this. So the topics are very important. They are almost always very personal to the speakers. Yet by the nature of our public comments, because they were not agendized, there cannot be a real discussion. So after sharing their concerns and problems, the speaker is leaving not feeling responded to or even truly heard and understood. This would surely be different in such a small committee. And please allow me to get a bit nostalgic about those good old times when we had subcommittees of the board, a facilities committee, an educational policies committee, a community relations committee, and my personal favorite, the fiscal committee. So 3 board members, faculty, staff, manager representatives, interested guests all around the table in A218C. No need to fill out a speaker slip or other formalities, but open discussion. Questions and comments were not only allowed, but invited and appreciated and immediately responded to. And while I am aware for the reasons why you did not continue those subcommittees in the past, I truly believe it is a great idea to bring this format back in order to address gender equity, harassment, and respectful communication here on campus. So I think this is a very good idea and very needed. Thank you. Now, please allow me to use my last 2 minutes, 45 seconds, 44 seconds. You get my point from earlier, right? So let me use those precious seconds for a personal comment on another but very related topic. In the last 6 months, a lot of gender equity issues have hit this campus, and I believe there are many people in this room, me included, who would sign the statement that we could have done things differently and better. Yesterday, Dr. Anthony Bibi sent out a personal letter to the college community in which he very openly, honestly, and self-critically reflected what happened in the last 6 months. And he apologized for mistakes made by him and his administration. No doubt, this letter was much needed, but especially in my experience, when talking to other union leaders in the state, this is pretty unheard of. I'm sure that writing and sending this letter was a difficult task. He still did it. This letter sends out a clear message of support for everyone in the college community. Can we discuss about individual steps our president is suggesting for the future? Or you bet we can, and most definitely we will. You know me. But what is to be acknowledged? He sent this letter. That is remarkable. And therefore, I want to personally thank Dr. Beebe. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia. With 1 minute, 11 seconds to go. Patricia Stark, and thank you for you are representing yourself as a member of the public. Welcome.
Thank you. Less than 48 hours ago, Tuesday afternoon, I sat across the table from Trustee Croninger and told her I would not oppose this. And I've actually changed my mind. And I'll tell you why. And let me just tell you, I've not vetted this with the Academic Senate. There's been no time. Things have been happening very quickly at our college. So I'm here pretty much speaking for myself, but my opinion is informed by things I know because I serve on various committees. I'm worried that this ad hoc committee, as proposed, would actually slow down the work of the college. And I want to reference a couple of different things. The letter that Cornelia just talked about, I think in that letter, in addition to his apology and other very admirable things that he wrote, Dr. Beebe outlined a very specific plan of action, multiple points of action, some of which are already, they're already going on. We've already embarked on them. That is something that we need to work on, and we can start working on right now. Today I went to my first PDAC committee, and PDAC stands for Professional Development Advisory Committee, and I was quite honestly blown away. Because what happened is all the different people around the table talked about all the different professional development we're currently engaged in. And it was mind-boggling. We have people working on our federal STEM grant who are bringing in training on equity. We have people working on our Flex grant, part-time students who are doing similar kinds of training. We had a request from a person who wants to do a series of workshops on neurodiverse students, or students on the autism spectrum, because we're seeing them more and more in our classes. It was and the point I made at PDAC is, wow, this is good. Let's get coordinated and let's make sure everybody is aware of these things because they're kind of happening in silos. So, this is all a way of saying that there's so many things going on. Yesterday, the Senate had its first detailed look at a resolution we wrote over the summer that matches the charge of your committee very, very closely. In his letter, Dr. Beebe awarded the Senate a $20,000 gift from the Aspen Institute, and I spent the morning trying to arrange travel arrangements for a team of faculty to go to Berkeley to listen to a foremost academic freedom speaker. So to overlay all of this, despite the good intentions, and I appreciate what everyone has said about your limited role there with public comments, but to overlay all of these efforts with another level of policy, I worry is overkill, and I honestly worry that it will slow us down. You mentioned policy. Well, you have a board policy and administrative procedure committee. We meet twice a month for 90 minutes, and we look at every single procedure and policy. There is campus-wide representation. Those procedures and policies all come before you, before they're published, when they're updated. So anyway, today, given everything that's happened in the past 48 hours, what I've learned, what's been said, we're moving on this. It's going to be imperfectly 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. And you know what, folks? We're not going to solve sexism at Santa Barbara City College. We're not going to fix all of these problems, but I think we're going to figure out our way of moving ahead. But I think it's got to come from us. The other thing I was going to say, if you want to talk to people, have a public meeting and have people come and talk to you there. But right now, I have some concerns that this would not be the help that I think you intended to be. Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Patricia? Is there anything I appreciate what you just said. I mean, it's all over the place, and I understand that. It's the beginning of a school year, too, at the same time. Is there anything that this board could do that would smooth this, not smooth it over, I don't mean that, but you know what I mean, it would help in some way?
I can't answer that for you, Marty. I know right now we're all looking for answers.
Yeah, for sure.
There's really a lot more to say about this, and I have to tell you, again, I'm speaking for myself. I don't speak for
No, I
all
know.
faculty. But I do think, I know that I would be committed to, I come to you once a month with a report from the Academic Senate. I would be committed to devoting the majority of that to the actions that were taken. And I would be happy to answer that question in the future as the answers arise to me, but I really can't.
Sure.
I wish I did. I wish I had the golden ticket.
No, that's good.
I
Thank
think
you.
we all do.
Thank you, good answer.
Thank you. Student trustee Farmer.
Thank you.
Yes, student trustee Farmer.
Yeah, so I think going back to the ad hoc committee and thinking about that, I think I agree with Trustee O'Neill saying that, we aren't trained to deal with some of these things and listen to some of these things. And I think it's been shown time and time again when the grievances have come forward. I think the bigger thing that SBCC needs to look at is outside training. I mean, I know Patricia Stark did comment on the many things that we are doing, but the problems is a lot of the people leading some of that work are the ones doing the abusing on this campus. So you're talking about going forward with gender equity issues when the very people that are leading the gender equity work are the ones that have Title IXs out against them, are the ones that are doing the abusing. So I just really would like to stress that I think if we're going to spend time spending money and looking for funding, we need to go outside of the college and bring people in that aren't connected to people, that aren't connected to other admins, that are going to do the work, people are going to do the work right. And I think, too, for this board is, if we can't even listen to people when they come here and make public comment, how are they going to believe that they're going to come to this ad hoc committee and be heard? That's just not a thing. Like simple things when Jonathan's mentioning adding cultural competency training and it's shut down. Simple things like when I mentioned the ACCT, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that I thought somebody should get on this board, silence. So when you have these are all around equity issues, these are all around gender issues, these are all around Title IX issues. And when you have a board that remains silent and doesn't say anything, but then when we want to go create an ad hoc committee and we want to think people are really going to say, wow, they're ready to listen. No, okay, James Baldwin has this quote that says, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. They are watching us, and they are watching what we do, and we're not doing enough. So we need to really look forward and say, it's okay to hold ourselves accountable and say, hey, you know what? We don't know what we're doing. It's okay to do that. It's okay to be vulnerable in that moment and say, hey, I don't know. I don't have all the answers either, but I'm willing to learn. And I think as a board and as leaders that we should be doing that. We should be saying, you know what, okay, let's take this training, let's do this. I don't think we should jump the gun starting all these ad hoc committees, starting all these committees, doing all this work until we deal with the fact and we face ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing.
Thank you, student trustee Farmer. Trustee Miller.
I think, Trustee Farmer, you just made a lot of the arguments in support of doing this, because we've been here and heard many, many comments over the last 6 months, and because of the Brown Act and because of the way we have to do business, we can't respond. And these issues have been difficult for the college, but this Board of Trustees has a huge responsibility. I appreciated Patricia's comments about all the work that's going on, and I think that's wonderful, and I think I'm glad to hear all that's happening, but I think we have a responsibility. And the reason why I think you made an argument in favor of it is that this is an opportunity for us to get down off this, out of these big chairs and sit with people and hear directly more about the concerns. We're not going to solve the ongoing issues right now. We want to know what we can do structurally with board policies so that in the future, we are better equipped to deal with the kinds of issues we're talking about. So I think I think this proposal does respond to the concerns you're expressing.
Can I comment really quick? How are we going to hear people when we don't know what we're listening for?
So if the board would like, I'd like to call the question, unless you guys feel that you want to further discuss this.
I'm not ready yet. I think I want to bring up a couple points myself.
Does anybody want to call the question? You guys want to keep discussing this?
Yes. Can I go back to my question?
Please do, yeah.
So, yeah, that I guess that would be my question. How are we going to hear people if we don't know what we are listening for?
I guess I don't understand I don't understand your question.
So so people have come to public comment about these very issues. I mean, the letter clearly states these issues. We are very aware these issues have been going on campus. So we've been hearing them, but because we don't know what we're listening to, we don't respond, we don't act. We all very well can put something on the agenda, and we just haven't. We haven't addressed things. So how are we going to start an ad hoc committee, and then people are going to come forward with these very grievances that we've already heard plenty of times that we're not listening to, but now all of a sudden we're going to listen?
Well, we don't know until we try. And
We've had so many opportunities to try, and
we're trying to.
Trustee Farmer, I apologize for interrupting you, and can you please let him finish?
Okay.
We don't know
Thank you.
until we try.
You didn't let me finish either, so
No,
take
I
your
know,
own
I
advice.
want to make sure that we're in order, and I do.
Just saying, take your own advice as well.
Better start somewhere.
So, board, if we're going to have a discussion, we just adopted a goal on civil discourse. So if we're going to have a discussion, either we can end this discussion or we can have, this is such an important topic, but let
You
everybody
interrupt
finish,
me all
everybody.
the time and cut me off all the time.
So-
So civil discourse to you as well, Veronica.
Is the board ready to call the question and to vote? Or is there further discussion? Because we can take action now if the majority of the board wants to move on.
I think at the very least, this needs to be sent to another board meeting because there's clearly no consensus, and we've heard different viewpoints, different sides of the faculty saying yes or no, some trustees having different ideas of how it should be implemented, some trustees don't think we should do it. I think there isn't a consensus at all, and I wouldn't want to take an action that has so little consensus, like a slim majority vote, because it doesn't have as much weight. So I don't know, I think maybe we should reconsider and come back, maybe bring it back as an ad hoc, maybe change the scope a little bit, maybe consult a little more to make it more focused, but I don't think we have a consensus on this, and I don't think we should pass something like this with a 4-3 vote.
Trustee Nielsen?
Yeah. Good point, Jonathan. However, the topics addressed, they're in writing and they're there, and we need to deal with them somehow. And so I wouldn't propose delaying it. I would propose that the committee start and in 30 days give us a preliminary report on what they're focusing on, what's going on, and what kind of prospects they think they might have to keep it going, instead of just shooting them out there, for however long. And let's see where it goes. Let's start somewhere, even if it's a little blind. We are listening. Again, my earlier point, and I listened very intently to what our student trustee said about not listening, and I think we do. The thing is we hear them. We hear the people tell us things when they come to before our meetings, but we are prevented from responding directly, and it needs to be done in a civil way so we have the opportunity to respond and read and study so we can make a proper response. And we don't just agendize anything, because this is not a grand jury. We don't do the administrative work. We write policies, and we hire a president to do that, and an administration that does that carries it out and sets the APs. We don't write those either at this board. But what we do care about is the students in the college and where it's going in the district that we serve. I don't want to kick this can down the road. I personally wouldn't have written it this way. I would have thought of a different way to go after it. And I know as a trustee that I have the freedom to do that and come back. But I don't mind if we start something like this, because doing something is almost always better than doing nothing. So let's give it a shot and see what kind of information you've got out there and see what we can maybe do. I think to do nothing is like a crime. I don't think that this committee's going to go out there and interfere with anybody else's work. I think they're just going to go out there and say, I'm here, I want to listen, I want to know. We're really interested, and the people that we serve in this district are interested, and the students are interested. So let's demonstrate that to a point. Thank you.
Would you like to make a motion to approve? Would you like to make a motion to approve?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by trustee Nielsen, seconded by trustee Croninger, to establish an ad hoc committee of the board to address moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversations on difficult subjects.
And I believe there was a suggestion that the committee come back in a relatively short period
Yes.
and talk to the board about
Like 2-3
what they're
board meetings
thinking.
from now,
Yeah.
4 board meetings from now. Let's set some kind of, like, to make some kind of report.
So we can accept a friendly amendment to establish how many days? 60 days. A 60-day ad hoc committee of the board to address moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversations on difficult subjects. Trustee Abud.
I mean, it looks like this is going to pass. So what I'd say is I think we need to do 30 days to keep it focused and so that we can know how to move forward more effectively as a board, because 60 days is a very long time from now. I think 30 days would at least be able to, you can do a lot of work in 30 days, and then the board can then say, yeah, this is worth it, or no, we should go in another direction, or create a standing committee.
Or someone could come back and say, we need 15 more days, and that might be all right, too.
That's something.
But set some kind of a
In the
limit.
education world, I think 30 days is 60 days, so 60 days is 90 days. So things move rather, these guys aren't going to be able to get in there and do it. They're going to have to go through Angie and Dr. Beebe. So if anybody wants to go to 30 days, we can, but if you want to stick with the 60 days, then we'll stick with the 60 days. Any thoughts?
Well, my thought is 60 days because we're asking for representatives of our various participatory governance groups, and you don't just say to them, I need your rep tomorrow in order to get started. So I think it's fair to give that some time.
I guess why I was saying 30 days is that I wouldn't want any actual work to be done until the board has a better sense of what is to be done. So 30 days can be developing a plan and, but I wouldn't want actual study of these things to be done over 60 days, and then you come back, and then I think it's already done at that point. You could do a lot of the things you want to do in the 60 days. So I think 30 days limits it to give the board more direction of the committee, because like with the mitigation committee, never came back for direction, just kind of did its own thing. I was on that committee, and there wasn't a formal report brought back. Marcia, you listed some things we talked about. Marty was at that meeting.
Oh.
And there was no actual document that said this is what the committee did. So I'd like a document in 30 days that says this is what we plan to do, and then with a timeline, because you can do a lot of that work as 2 people in 30 days. Plan out what you want to do, what you want to study, how you want to go about this, and then bring it back, because this is the first time we hear of it. This is a big thing, and for the board to authorize something this big without a plan, I think is irresponsible.
Trustee Miller.
I guess I misunderstood what the time limit was for. I didn't know we were going to be limited in what we could do in the first 30 days. So if you're just talking about us coming back with a plan, then I have no problem with 30 days. But I was assuming we'd start work.
Yeah, my assumption as well is that we would not do a plan without input from our participatory governance folks who would say to us, this is an important direction or this is not, that we would not do it by ourselves. We're looking for this to be a collective effort, not something that we impose on people.
Yeah, I'm going to have to oppose, I will oppose this, not that I think that, we couldn't do this, but, from the time that we've been on this board, each of us has been told, and I understand totally the reason, to stay above things, that we're at the policy level. And just the way this reads, it makes us go down into the weeds. I mean, it says we want these different groups from the campus to come and tell us. I mean, what you're doing is adding work for them, and that doesn't seem like a good thing to do. I think it's worthwhile to meet and have some kind of a come back, 30, 60, not 90, but, come back with a proposal for the entire board, I guess I'm reacting to the idea that we would add on to the burdens of some of these groups, like the Academic Senate and so on, and have them, why would 3 of us go out and talk to the Academic Senate? Talk about getting down into the weeds. That doesn't seem like a good idea.
It's not the idea.
Or the Faculty Association, or California School Employees Association, that's Liz, isn't it? That's easy. But it just doesn't seem right to me. I think if it's an issue that we are all bothered about and so on, then bring it back to us with an idea of what we could help. What can we do to help? Which is what I asked a while ago. What is it that we can do to help this? And I don't have an answer right now. But if they wanted to talk about it in their committee, that's okay with me, but come back with an answer, or come back with a plan.
Guys feel comfortable with that?
We can certainly do that. I'm remain a bit uncomfortable with the idea of just 3 board members coming up with that plan without input. And I'm certainly not looking to increase the workload of our folks so much as the point is to have that input in developing a plan. From my point of view, I want to hear more from Patricia. I want to hear more from Cornelia and Liz and whoever they choose to be a representative in saying, what can we do to help? And not deciding by ourselves. Granted, it's at the policy level. It absolutely is. But I can see some gaps in our policies already. So
I think the word plan was referring to plan of work, not plan of action. Like we are going to talk to these people. We're going to do it in this way. I know it's set here, but I have been told to come back with a more extensive plan when I've brought my board that I work for something like this. And this is not enough to make a decision of this size. And so I would just ask if you could just bring us back with something more specific, just something maybe a little more narrowed. I just think that we are putting out 3 trustees to go investigate these very broad topics is also a lot. And to do that, I think we need to have more information and more understanding of what's going to be done.
Dr. Beebe?
So as Patricia pointed out, I proposed a plan of action for us to move forward with. It's not perfect, and there are some things that are going to be tweaked, I can guarantee it, by the governance groups, but we've got an outline of a plan of action. One thing that I would propose would be let us work that plan. Let us move forward with that and bring back a report of how we're moving forward with that. I just put it out yesterday, so it's, we haven't had time to work on it or come up with specific action items. But I would propose postponing this right now and let us, at the college level, work on trying to move forward with that plan. And there could be things that could come out of that where you might be helpful. But, I think if you get involved with it at this point, Patricia makes a really good point in terms of it could actually slow down some of the things that we're trying to move forward with.
So if they created it, but just held kind of, I don't know, researching, looking at like the Harvard, university project they have it out, if they didn't engage yet till you gave them the green light, would that be okay? If they created it, and they could just come back and say, oh, well, we are done. We don't need to do anything, Dr. Beebe. 'Cause they're not going to do anything without you anyway. So I guess to just have, the desire, at least for the majority, is to have it, but maybe not engage to the full scope of what's outlined here until you give sort of a green light.
I'd like to see if we can put this on the table and just, and it's there. This is a proposal. We're concerned. That shows our concern. And so I think you have to, I've forgotten my,
Yeah, we can move to table and just.
yeah, we can move to table and that takes precedence, doesn't it? Yeah, thank you.
I move to table the current motion.
Is there a second to table?
Yeah, Jonathan, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay. We'll go for a vote. Angie, do you want a roll call, or do you want us just to? Okay. So all in favor to table this item 9.3, establishment of an ad hoc committee of the Board to address moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversation on difficult subjects. Sorry, that was moved by Trustee Bloom and seconded by Trustee Aboud. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Two of us.
Aye.
Peter, aye. Oppose? Aye. Okay, so now we're back to 9.3.
What was the vote?
The vote was to table it, so it was a 3-4.
What was the vote count? 3
3-4.
yes, 4 no?
Okay, so we're back to the original motion.
Confused.
There was a vote to table.
The vote passed.
No. 3-4.
Oh, okay.
We should have a revote.
So it was moved by Trustee Bloom and seconded by Trustee Aboud to table item 9.3.
Let's call for a roll.
Yeah, let's go.
Trustee Farmer?
Yes.
Trustee Nielsen?
No.
Trustee Carninger?
No.
Trustee Miller?
No.
Trustee Bloom?
Yes.
Trustee Haslam?
Yes.
Trustee Aboud?
Yes.
Trustee Gallardos?
No. Okay, so we're back at 9.3. So there was a friendly amendment to have a 60-day, and then there was a 30-day. So which would?
Could we say 60 days and then come back to this body within 30 days with a status report that says, that could say,
Fine.
we're done, or it could say we failed, or it could say we've succeeded, and here's how.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved by Trustee Haslam, seconded by Trustee Nielsen to establish a 60-day ad hoc committee with a report to come back to this body in 30 days, addressing the board on moving forward on gender equity, sexual harassment, and respectful conversations on difficult subjects.
Okay?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Evidence of the mission people care about. We have board policies that are up for revision. Can we take them all at the same time?
Please.
These are board policies that the board has seen. It is up for your approval tonight. Is there a motion to approve item 9.4 through item 9.7, which is revision to board policies chapter 2, Board of Trustees, Chapter 4, Academic Affairs, Chapter 6, Business and Fiscal Affairs, and Chapter 7, Human Resources. Of course, the specific VPs are in your agenda, but those are the chapters in which they come from. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Trustee Aboud and seconded by Trustee Carninger to approve.
Question?
Yes, discussion, yes. Trustee Haslam.
Yeah. I'm searching for the right board policy, but the board policy with respect to the formation of ad hoc no, of standing committees
Oh,
specifies that there shall be no written minutes. And I just like to know why that would be the case.
That surprised me because we used to have minutes
Well,
with the fiscal committee and
I think,
or something.
I think we had minutes, but typically the chair would do the minutes.
Oh, okay,
And there was something as opposed to nothing.
yeah.
Yeah.
The decision was made during Dr. Gaskin's time period,
Yeah.
and it was based on workload for Angie and for those involved, and the decision was basically, there's a tape, and the tape will do. So it was an effort to reduce workload. When we ran it through that committee that Marty and I were on, went through all board policies. That's probably when the change was made, actually.
Okay.
so again, trustee Haslam's referencing BP 20-20, where it says standing committees, and it's, the last sentence reads, there will be no written minutes of standing committee meetings. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Okay, motion carries. We are at item 10.1, and it's 6:50, and Pamela, Dr. Pamela Ralston has been so patiently sitting there.
We've all been waiting for this moment.
And this is an important one, and next time we can take her out of order.
Yes, we will. She's been very patient.
Yep, we are.
We apologize for that, Dr. Ralston.
This will only be an hour or so, right? No.
Thank you, Board of Trustees, audience members. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about this super uplifting conversation surrounding accreditation. I'm sure we're all excited about that at this point in the evening. I'm here to present a very rough working draft of our midterm 2018 ACCJC report. You have a copy with you. The next time you see this, this will be fully formatted. The evidence will be detailed and laid out. In addition to internal text citation, the evidence pieces in the back will be fully ordered. So I wanted to give you some context on what a midterm report is. It's been a while since you've seen one. We're on a 7-year cycle, and we're in year 3, and our next report will be due in 2021. And so this is a moment in which the institution slows down and reflects on planning actions we took in 2015. We have 11 actionable improvement plans that we needed to report our progress on. And so inside this document, you see very brief updated information on that, and then evidence to support the work that we are progressing on. In addition, we also have 2 improvement recommendations. So ACCJC has 2 types of recommendations. They used to only have 1 type of recommendation. You never knew if it was a good, bad sort of thing. And now what we understand is we have both a compliance set of recommendations and we have a set of improvement recommendations. And in the 2017 follow-up report, Santa Barbara City College responded to 5 recommendations, 3 of which were compliance recommendations that we had to resolve. 2 of which were improvement recommendations we were encouraged to continue addressing and getting better at as we move forward. And the response from ACCJC after reviewing our report came back that we were in full compliance on those compliance recommendations, and we had made the necessary changes, and we were encouraged to continue moving forward our improvement recommendations. So when you read the text, it'll seem strange that there are numbers like recommendation number 1 and then randomly recommendation number 5. That's because we adequately addressed recommendations 2, 3, and 4 on the compliance piece. Recommendation 2 asked us to consider how we could do a better job considering our distance education outcomes in relationship to our face-to-face outcomes in classes, and so we developed comparative data analysis that we share with faculty. Recommendation number 3 was to update our distance education plan, which we are in compliance with now. Recommendation number 4 was to make sure that we are progressing and completing in a timely fashion our personnel evaluations, which we're in compliance with and we continue to do as our work. And then the 2 that we're addressing here in this report are recommendations 1, which is for our institutional effectiveness, we need to make sure that we continue to evaluate our planning cycle processes, and so we're in compliance with that now. And Item number 5, recommendation number 5, is that we should pursue at all costs efforts to improve the resources of the facilities on our campus. And in June, you actually voted in favor of the 5-year plan. So that was actually a piece of evidence that's landed nicely inside this document. So if you're looking for yourselves represented, you will be there. And then we have these 11 actionable improvement items, which I am not going to go into detail on, but you can rest assured that we are progressing really well on those. And when I come back for a formal first read on this document for you to vote on, we can go through those in detail when we've all had dinner. Do you have questions about midterm reports in general or this one in specific?
So this is first reading. If you notice on there, it says that the board will approve this on October 11, 2018, which is not now. But they put that sort of as a placeholder, assuming that you are okay with what is so eloquently been written in here. Thank you. So, do you guys have any questions? We're just saying thank you, because whenever we go to trustee conference, they're saying your accreditation, and the fact that you do all the legwork is a huge thank you.
Well, certainly, but this is a work of everyone who's been at the institution up until now and long past all of us. So accreditation is an ongoing activity. The Institutional Research Office and ZREIS has done a great job keeping this work together. And then staff and faculty administrators do all of this work. And so this is a really collective effort. And it's just my job to get to present it to you. So thank you.
Well, thank then the team from our behalf. Do you guys have any other questions? There's a lot of charts, a lot of percentages. 7 o'clock. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ralston.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good stuff.
Okay, trustees, is there a motion to adjourn?
I would so delightfully move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, darn.
Okay, has been delightfully moved and seconded by trustee Haslam and trustee Miller to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? No one. Yes, motion carries. Thank you.
Boy.